The judge said, "All assets to your ex-wife and her new husband." I smiled because she had no idea what was coming next. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, turns out my wife Caroline had some pretty spectacular plans of her own, and I was about as welcome in them as a vegan at a barbecue competition. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you how my perfectly ordinary Tuesday turned into the kind of disaster that makes reality TV look like amateur hour. My name's Thomas Mercer, and up until about 3 hours ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Two-story colonial in the suburbs, white picket fence that I actually painted myself last summer like some kind of domestic superhero, and a wife who could make Pinterest boards weep with envy. Hell, I even had one of those lawn mowers that makes those satisfying diagonal stripes in the grass. The whole 9 yards, complete with a golden retriever that Caroline insisted we name Gatsby, because apparently we needed our dog to be as pretentious as our neighborhood book club. I'd been in Chicago for 3 days, schmoozing clients and pretending to care about quarterly projections while secretly counting down the hours until I could get back home. The meetings wrapped up early. Some miracle involving the CEO actually making a decision instead of forming another committee to think about forming a committee, so I decided to surprise Caroline. You know, the whole romantic husband returns early thing. Maybe we'd order Thai food, binge-watch something mindless on Netflix, and I'd listen to her complain about whatever drama was unfolding at that fancy art gallery where she worked. Typical married couple stuff. The drive back from O'Hare was pure hell, naturally. Chicago traffic has this special way of making you question every life choice that led you to that particular moment. Sitting in a metal box surrounded by other people in metal boxes, all of us collectively losing our minds at 5 miles per hour. But I was pumped. I had this whole mental movie playing out. Caroline's surprised face, maybe a little squeal of delight, definitely some quality time that didn't involve her scrolling through Instagram while I pretended to watch whatever cooking show she'd discovered that week. I pulled into our driveway around 4:30, noting that Caroline's silver BMW was parked at its usual angle that somehow managed to take up exactly 1 3/4 parking spaces. The woman could parallel park like she was conducting brain surgery, but give her a driveway, and suddenly geometry became her mortal enemy. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk, already mentally rehearsing my "honey, I'm home early" entrance. That's when I heard her voice drifting through the screen door. Now, here's the thing about eavesdropping. It's like opening Pandora's box, except Pandora's box is your marriage, and instead of unleashing evil upon the world, you're just unleashing evil upon your Tuesday afternoon. I should have announced myself. Should have walked right through that door, kissed my wife, and asked her about her day like a normal human being. Instead, I found myself frozen on my own front porch like some kind of suburban statue, listening to my wife of 15 years absolutely demolish my existence with the casual efficiency of someone ordering a latte. "Bradley, I know it's complicated, but we've talked about this." Her voice had that breathless quality she usually reserved for discussing vacation plans or new shoes. "The divorce papers are already drawn up. My lawyer says with his temper and the recordings I have, I'll get at least 70% of everything." "Recordings? What recordings?" I racked my brain trying to remember the last time I'd lost my temper. Last week I'd gotten mildly annoyed when she'd loaded the dishwasher wrong. Again, but I'd expressed my frustration by reorganizing the plates in silence like a proper passive-aggressive suburban husband. I know, she continued, and I could practically hear her twirling that strand of blonde hair she always played with when she was excited. "Once this is over, we can finally be together. Really together. No more sneaking around, no more hotel rooms. Just you, me, and enough money to do whatever we want." Bradley Morrison, her boss at the Morrison Gallery. The guy I'd met at Christmas parties and office functions, with his perfectly groomed beard and his habit of pronouncing gallery like it rhymed with salary. The same Bradley who'd complimented my tie at their company picnic last summer while apparently planning to dismantle my marriage from the inside. "Thomas will never see it coming," Caroline laughed, and the sound hit me like a brick to the solar plexus. It wasn't her fake laugh, the one she used at dinner parties when someone told a story that wasn't actually funny. This was genuine Caroline amusement, the kind I used to love hearing when we watched comedies together back, when we actually watched anything together. I stood there on my own porch, overnight bag in hand, listening to my wife discuss my financial destruction with the enthusiasm of someone planning a surprise birthday party. Except the surprise was on me, and instead of cake, I was apparently getting served with divorce papers and a side order of complete humiliation. He's so predictable, she went on. Works late, travels for business, never questions anything. Honestly, Bradley, sometimes I think he's more married to that lawn mower than he is to me. Okay, that hurt. I mean, yes, I took pride in my lawn care, but it wasn't like I'd ever chosen yard work over quality time with my wife. Although, come to think of it, quality time with Caroline lately had mostly involved listening to her complain about everything from the neighbor's dog to the temperature of her coffee to the general inadequacy of my existence as a human being. The recordings are perfect, she said, and my blood went from warm to absolute zero. I've been editing them for months. Just little clips here and there. Him losing his temper, raising his voice, sounding threatening. My lawyer says it's exactly what we need to prove he's unstable. 15 years. 15 goddamn years of marriage, of thinking we were building something together, of believing that the woman I'd pledged my life to actually gave a damn about that life. I thought about all those nights she'd seemed distant, all those times she'd claimed to be working late, all those weekends she'd suddenly developed an urgent need to visit her sister Claire in the city. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were slam-dunking themselves into place with the force of a meteor hitting Earth. I heard her moving around inside, probably pacing the way she did when she was really excited about something. I have to go, she said. He'll be back from Chicago tomorrow, and I need to practice looking surprised when he comes home. You know how he gets when he thinks something's wrong. Actually, Caroline, I get observant. There's a difference, though I was starting to realize you'd never bothered to learn it. The call ended, and I heard her footsteps heading toward the kitchen. I had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to play this. Walk in and confront her? Pretend I hadn't heard anything? Set the house on fire and claim insurance money? That last option was looking pretty tempting, not gonna lie. Instead, I took a deep breath, plastered what I hoped was a convincing smile on my face, and opened the front door like a man walking into his own execution. Honey, I called out, dropping my bag by the door. I'm home early. The war, I realized, had already begun. Caroline just didn't know I'd finally shown up to fight. If acting was an Olympic sport, Caroline would have taken home the gold, silver, and bronze medals while simultaneously coaching the entire U.S. team. The woman's performance when I walked through that door was nothing short of spectacular. The kind of acting that makes you wonder if she'd been practicing in front of a mirror for years, perfecting the art of being a lying, cheating wife. Tommy, she squealed, practically bouncing across the hardwood floors in those ridiculous fuzzy slippers she insisted on wearing everywhere. For a split second, I almost believed her excitement was genuine. Almost. But when you've just heard someone planning your financial execution with the enthusiasm of a kid planning Christmas morning, it's hard to buy into the whole loving wife routine. She threw her arms around me like I was a soldier returning from war instead of a husband back from 3 days of mind-numbing business meetings. Her perfume, that expensive stuff she bought at Nordstrom and claimed was an investment in our marriage, hit me like a cloud of betrayal-scented lies. I missed you so much, she breathed into my ear, and I had to fight the urge to ask if she'd missed me as much as she'd missed planning my destruction with Bradley the art gallery Romeo. Missed you too, sweetheart. I managed, my voice somehow staying steady despite the fact that my entire world had just been rearranged like furniture in an earthquake. Chicago was brutal. Nothing but conference rooms and bad coffee. Poor baby, she cooed, running her fingers through my hair the way she used to when we were actually happy. Or when I thought we were happy. At this point, I was starting to question whether our entire marriage had been one long con job with me as the mark. I made reservations at Chez Laurent for tonight. I thought we could celebrate you coming home. Chez Laurent, the fancy French place downtown where they charge $40 for what amounts to artistic arrangements of food on oversized plates. The same place where she'd probably practiced her innocent wife routine between plotting sessions with Bradley. I wondered if she'd rehearsed her surprised expression in their bathroom mirror, right between courses of overpriced duck confit. That sounds perfect, I said, because apparently I was now committed to this whole performance art piece we were creating together. The show must go on, even when the show is your marriage imploding in slow motion. For the next few hours, I got a front row seat to the Caroline Mercer masterclass in deception. She flitted around the house like a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide, chatting about her day at the gallery, complaining about traffic, asking about my meetings with the kind of interest that would have been touching if it wasn't complete bullshit. Oh, and the weirdest thing happened today, she said while putting on her makeup, applying mascara with the precision of someone painting the Sistine Chapel. Dana called and said she saw someone who looked exactly like you at that coffee shop on 5th Street. But you were in Chicago, so obviously it wasn't you. Dana Fletcher, Caroline's best friend since college, and her partner in what I was now realizing was probably a conspiracy that would make Watergate look like a middle school prank. I'd always thought Dana was harmless, just another suburban housewife with too much time and too many opinions about other people's business. Now I was wondering if she was part of Caroline's little support team, helping manufacture evidence of my supposed crimes against matrimony. That's weird, I agreed, watching her face in the mirror. Must have been my evil twin. She laughed, that fake laugh again, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. How long had she been practicing this? How many conversations had we had where she was essentially performing a one-woman show titled Innocent Wife Married to Terrible Husband? At dinner, Caroline outdid herself. She ordered wine like she was celebrating something special, touched my hand across the table like we were newlyweds, and told stories about the gallery with the kind of animated enthusiasm that would have been charming if I didn't know she was basically auditioning for the role of wronged woman in the upcoming production of Thomas Mercer Gets Screwed Over. Bradley's been such a pain lately, she said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. He's been micromanaging everyone, making all these demands about exhibition schedules. I swear, sometimes I think he forgets that some of us have lives outside of work. The casual way she said his name, like he was just some annoying boss instead of her co-conspirator in Operation Destroy Thomas, was almost impressive. I had to admire the sheer audacity of it. Here she was, probably still tasting his lies on her lips from whatever afternoon rendezvous they'd had, complaining about him like he was nothing more than an occupational hazard. Maybe he's just stressed, I suggested, taking a sip of wine that suddenly tasted like liquid irony. You know how these artistic types can be. Maybe, she said, but something flickered across her face, just for a second, like she was remembering something pleasant. Probably remembering how Bradley looked without his perfectly pressed gallery owner shirts. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of Caroline's greatest hits. Concerns about the neighbor's new fence, excitement about some upcoming gallery opening, complaints about the grocery store changing their produce layout. Normal married couple conversation, except nothing about it was normal anymore. Every word felt like part of an elaborate script, every smile like a costume she was wearing. When we got home, she made a big show of being tired, claiming all the excitement of my return had worn her out. She disappeared into the bathroom for her nightly routine, the same routine that apparently now included practicing her victim face in the mirror and probably texting Bradley about how well her performance was going. I sat on our bed, watching her move around the bedroom we'd shared for 15 years, and tried to process the fact that I was living with a stranger. This woman who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who could predict my reactions to movies before I had them, who'd seen me sick and healthy and everything in between. This woman was essentially a highly skilled actress who'd been method acting the role of my wife for God knows how long. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sliding under the covers beside me. Even her concern sounded rehearsed. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." She curled up next to me, resting her head on my chest the way she had thousands of times before. Except now it felt like sharing a bed with a very attractive, very dangerous con artist. Her breathing gradually slowed into the rhythm of sleep, but I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. More performances, more lies, more elaborate theater designed to make me look like the villain in my own life story. But now I knew I was watching a show, which meant I could start planning my own performance. If Caroline thought she was the only one who could play a role, she was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. You know that moment when you realize you've brought a butter knife to a gunfight? Yeah, that was me for about 12 hours after Caroline's little performance. But here's the thing about getting sucker punched by your own wife. It either breaks you or it makes you really, really focused. And buddy, I was about as focused as a laser beam cutting through steel. I spent that sleepless night doing what any rational person would do when they discover their spouse is plotting their financial assassination. I Googled best divorce lawyers near me, like my life depended on it. Because, let's face it, it kind of did. Caroline had clearly been planning this hostile takeover for months, maybe years, while I'd been living in blissful ignorance, worried about lawn care and quarterly reports like some kind of suburban amateur. The name Patricia Hendress kept popping up in every search, every legal forum, every best of list I could find. They called her the Shark, the Destroyer, and my personal favorite, the divorce attorney who makes other divorce attorneys cry. Her website looked like something out of a legal thriller, all sharp edges and testimonials that read like war stories from the trenches of matrimonial combat. I called her office at exactly 8 a.m., figuring I'd leave a message and maybe hear back in a few days. Instead, her secretary, who sounded like she could intimidate a Supreme Court justice, put me through immediately. "Mr. Mercer," came a voice that could cut glass. "I've been expecting your call." That stopped me cold. Expecting my call. "Your wife contacted several attorneys in the city last month, including myself." I declined to represent her. There was amusement in her voice, the kind that suggested she knew exactly how this story was going to end. Something about her approach didn't sit right with me. Professional instinct. Well, damn. Apparently Caroline's shopping for legal representation had been about as subtle as a marching band in a library. "Can you see me today? 2 o'clock. Don't bring any documents. We'll handle that later. Just bring your story and your checkbook." Patricia Hendress's office was located in one of those glass towers downtown that made you feel like you were entering the Death Star. The kind of building where people wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and where everyone walked like they were late for a meeting that would determine the fate of Western civilization. Her reception area looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to intimidate clients into honesty. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, and law books arranged with the precision of a military formation. The whole place screamed serious business, which was exactly what I needed because Caroline's little game was about as serious as business gets. When Patricia finally emerged from her office, I understood immediately why Caroline had walked away from this particular consultation. The woman was intimidating in the way that icebergs are intimidating. You could see the tip, but you knew there was a lot more danger lurking beneath the surface. She was probably in her 50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who charged by the precision of each stitch. But it was her eyes that really got your attention, sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. The kind of eyes that could spot a lie from 3 states away. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending a hand that gripped mine with the firmness of someone who'd spent decades crushing opposing counsel's arguments. "Let's talk." Her office was even more impressive than the reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, bookshelves lined with legal tomes that looked like they contained the secrets of the universe, and a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip for small aircraft. The walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings, bar association awards, and what looked like thank you letters from clients who'd probably walked out of their divorces with everything except their spouse's fillings. "So," she said, settling behind her desk like a general preparing for battle, "your wife is planning to ambush you with divorce papers, claims to have recordings of you being abusive, and is sleeping with her boss. Did I miss anything?" I blinked. "How did you?" "Mr. Mercer, I've been doing this for 30 years. Your wife's strategy is about as original as a rerun of a bad sitcom. The fake recordings, the manufactured evidence, the affair with someone in a position of power. It's Divorce Attorney 101. The only question is whether you're going to let her get away with it." For the next hour, I laid out everything I knew. The phone call, Caroline's performance, the timeline of her sudden work commitments, and late nights at the gallery. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in handwriting that looked like it had been carved in stone by someone who charged by the letter. "Your wife made several critical mistakes," she said when I finished. "First, she underestimated you. Second, she overestimated her own cleverness. And third, she tried to hire me. Why is that last one a mistake?" Patricia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel consider career changes. "Because now I know her strategy, her timeline, and her weaknesses. And more importantly, I know exactly how to dismantle everything she's built. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. Mark Sandler, private investigator. He's the best in the business, and more importantly, he's meticulous. If your wife is having an affair, he'll document it. If she's hiding assets, he'll find them. If she's manufactured evidence, he'll prove it. Is he expensive? Mr. Mercer, your wife is planning to take 70% of everything you own, plus alimony that would make a lottery winner wince. Trust me, Mark's fees are going to look like pocket change compared to what you'll lose if we don't build an airtight case. She stood up, and I got the distinct impression that our consultation was moving into the action phase. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home and pretend everything is normal. You're going to be the perfect husband, flowers, dinners, attention, the whole 9 yards. Meanwhile, Mark is going to document your wife's extracurricular activities, and I'm going to build a case that will make her wish she'd never heard of divorce court. How long do we have? Based on her previous consultations, I'd say she's planning to serve you within the next few weeks. That gives us just enough time to turn her ambush into our counterattack. As I was leaving, Patricia handed me a thick folder. Homework, she said. Financial documents, timeline of suspicious behavior, character witnesses. I want you to document everything, and I mean everything. If your wife changed her perfume, I want to know about it. If she started working out, I want to know about it. If she so much as bought different brand of coffee, I want to know about it. Walking back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Caroline's phone call. Hope. Not the naive hope of a husband who thinks his marriage can be saved, but the cold, calculating hope of a man who's finally realized he's been playing checkers while his wife was playing chess. Well, Caroline, I thought as I drove home to whatever performance was waiting for me. Turns out I just learned how to play chess too. And I brought some very expensive, very ruthless coaches. Game on. Mark Sandler looked like the kind of guy you'd never notice in a crowd, which, according to Patricia, was exactly why he was so damn good at his job. Average height, forgettable face, the kind of generic appearance that made him invisible in a world where everyone was too busy staring at their phones to pay attention to anything else. But his eyes, those were anything but average. Sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. The guy could probably tell you what someone had for breakfast just by watching them walk. We met at a coffee shop downtown, one of those trendy places where they charge $8 for what amounts to burned water with delusions of grandeur. Mark ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream, no nonsense, while I fumbled with the menu like some kind of caffeinated amateur. Patricia filled me in on the basics, he said, pulling out a tablet that looked like it could hack into the Pentagon. Cheating wife, manufactured evidence, planned financial ambush. Standard Tuesday for me, really. How long have you been doing this? 15 years. Started as a cop, got tired of seeing criminals walk free on technicalities, switched to private investigation where I could actually make a difference. He sipped his coffee like it was truth serum. Your wife's type. I've seen it 100 times. They think they're criminal masterminds, but they're usually just desperate housewives who've watched too many legal dramas. Over the next hour, Mark laid out his plan with the precision of a military strategist. Surveillance, financial tracking, digital forensics, the whole 9 yards. He explained how he'd document Caroline's movements, track her communications, and build a timeline that would make her affair look like a badly scripted soap opera. The key, he said, is patience. Your wife thinks she's being clever, but people having affairs are predictable. They develop patterns, routines, habits. Once I identify those patterns, documenting them becomes as easy as following a recipe. What about the recordings she mentioned? The ones she's been editing? Mark's smile was colder than my overpriced latte. That's where she made her biggest mistake. Fabricated evidence leaves digital fingerprints everywhere, metadata, editing software traces, device histories. If she's been splicing recordings to make you sound abusive, I'll prove it. And when I do, her credibility in court will be somewhere south of a used car salesman's. The surveillance started the next day. While I played the role of oblivious husband at home, Mark became Caroline's shadow. He followed her to work, documented her lunch meetings, tracked her evening shopping trips that somehow never resulted in any actual purchases. Within a week, he had enough photographic evidence to stock a small museum of marital betrayal. The pictures he showed me were like getting punched in the gut repeatedly by reality. There was Caroline, walking hand in hand with Bradley through Millennium Park like they were starring in their own romantic comedy. Caroline and Bradley sharing intimate dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford on special occasions. Caroline and Bradley checking into the Palmer House Hotel for what Mark diplomatically called afternoon meetings. "Your wife's not exactly subtle," Mark observed, scrolling through what looked like a greatest hits collection of adultery. They hit the same 3 restaurants, the same hotel, even park in the same spots. It's like they're following a script. But the photographs were just the appetizer. The main course came when Mark started digging into Caroline's digital footprint. Bank records showing cash withdrawals that coincided with her meetings with Bradley. Credit card statements revealing charges at lingerie stores and expensive restaurants during times when she told me she was working late or visiting her sister. "Your wife's been busy," Mark said, spreading out financial documents across his desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "She's opened 3 separate bank accounts in the past 6 months, all funded with cash deposits that match her withdrawals from your joint account. She's also been using a prepaid credit card for what I can only describe as affair maintenance, hotels, dinners, gifts for her boyfriend." The most damning evidence came from Caroline's own devices. Mark had somehow managed to recover deleted text messages, emails, and even voice recordings from her phone and laptop. Don't ask me how. The guy operated like some kind of digital wizard crossed with a bloodhound. The recovered messages were a masterclass in criminal stupidity. Caroline and Bradley discussing their plan in explicit detail, laughing about how easy it would be to take Thomas for everything he's worth. There were voice memos of Caroline practicing her victim routine, complete with fake tears and rehearsed sob stories about my supposed abuse. But the crown jewel of Mark's investigation was discovering Caroline's audio editing software. Apparently, she'd been using some professional-grade program to splice together recordings of me from completely different conversations, creating fake evidence of verbal abuse that never actually happened. She took a recording of you yelling at a Bears game and spliced it with her asking about dinner plans, Mark explained, playing back the original recordings alongside Caroline's fabricated versions. The edited version makes it sound like you screamed at her for asking what you wanted to eat. The reality is you were yelling touchdown at your TV. I listened to Caroline's manufactured evidence with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. The woman had essentially created an alternate reality where I was some kind of domestic tyrant, using my own voice as the weapon against me. It was diabolical, creative, and completely insane. How many of these fake recordings does she have? 17 that I've found so far. She's been building this case against you for at least 8 months, maybe longer. Every argument, every moment of frustration, every time you raised your voice, she's been recording and editing it into evidence of abuse. Patricia's financial investigation revealed the other half of Caroline's master plan. She'd been systematically documenting our assets, photographing important documents, and even having our house appraised without my knowledge. Bradley, it turned out, wasn't just her affair partner. He was also helping her hide money and plan for her post-divorce life. They've already put a deposit down on a condo in River North, Patricia informed me during one of our strategy sessions. Apparently, they're planning to move in together as soon as your divorce is finalized. They've even picked out furniture. The scope of Caroline's deception was breathtaking. While I'd been worried about lawn care and work deadlines, she'd been orchestrating a complete identity theft of my life. Every smile, every kiss, every moment of apparent intimacy had been part of an elaborate con game designed to strip me of everything I'd worked for. But here's the thing about building a house of cards. It only takes one good push to bring the whole thing crashing down. And thanks to Mark's investigation, we now had enough evidence to create a hurricane. So what's our next move? I asked Patricia during our final preparation meeting. Her smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. We wait for her to make the first move. Let her serve you with those papers. Let her file for that restraining order. Let her put on her little victim performance in court. Then we show the judge exactly what kind of victim she really is. Caroline had spent months building her case against me. Too bad for her. We'd spent weeks building an even better case against her. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for her to walk into it. If Caroline thought she was the only one who could play the long game, she was about to get a master class in strategic planning from someone who'd spent 15 years learning her every tell, every habit, and every weakness. While she was busy building her elaborate house of lies, I was quietly constructing something much more substantial, a financial fortress that would make Fort Knox look like a piggy bank. Daniel Cruz had been my financial advisor for almost a decade, the kind of guy who could make money multiply like rabbits and had the ethics of a Swiss banker crossed with a Jesuit priest. When I called him for an urgent consultation, he cleared his calendar faster than a fire alarm evacuation. "Tom," he said, settling into his office chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. "You sounded stressed on the phone. What's going on?" I laid out the situation with the clinical precision of a surgeon describing a tumor. Caroline's affair, her financial manipulations, the impending divorce papers, and most importantly, her plan to walk away with 70% of everything I'd worked for since college. Daniel listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in that careful handwriting that financial advisors seem to learn in some secret school. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers like he was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Patricia thinks she'll serve the papers within the week. Then we need to move fast. And we need to move smart." Daniel pulled out a legal pad and started sketching what looked like a flowchart designed by someone who'd read every financial strategy book ever written. "The good news is, most of your assets are things we can legally protect. The bad news is, we have to do it without triggering any flags that might alert Caroline or her attorney." Over the next 3 days, Daniel and I orchestrated what I like to think of as the great asset migration of 2024. It was like watching a master chess player execute a strategy that had been planned 20 moves in advance, except instead of chess pieces, we were moving around investments, properties, and bank accounts. First up was the house. Our beautiful 2-story colonial that Caroline loved to show off to her book club friends was suddenly no longer owned by Thomas and Caroline Mercer. Instead, it now belonged to Meridian Property Holdings LLC, a corporation that I happened to control, but that existed in a legal gray area that would give Caroline's lawyer nightmares for months. "How is this legal?" I asked Daniel as we signed the paperwork. "Because it is legal," he said with the confidence of someone who'd navigated tax codes and property laws like a GPS system. "You're not hiding assets, you're restructuring them. The house is still part of the marital estate, technically, but now it's wrapped in enough legal protections that Caroline's 70% grab becomes significantly more complicated." Next came the investment accounts. Daniel had connections at banks that most people had never heard of, the kind of institutions that specialized in what he called wealth preservation strategies. Within 48 hours, my retirement accounts, stock portfolios, and investment properties were scattered across the financial landscape like seeds planted in the most fertile legal soil money could buy. "Swiss accounts?" I asked, watching Daniel type commands into his computer with the speed of someone playing a very expensive video game. "Better. Domestic trusts, offshore LLCs, and investment vehicles that are completely legitimate but structured in ways that make them difficult to liquidate quickly." Daniel's smile was the kind that probably made IRS auditors wake up in cold sweats. "Your wife wants 70% of your assets? She's welcome to try to figure out where they all are first." The most elegant part of the whole operation was how we handled the business. My consulting firm, which Caroline had always dismissed as boring corporate stuff, suddenly became the crown jewel of our defensive strategy. Daniel restructured it as an international entity with holdings in 3 different countries, each with their own beautifully complex legal requirements. "The beauty of this," Daniel explained as we watched my business assets disappear into a labyrinth of legal entities, "is that Caroline probably doesn't even understand what your company does, let alone how it's structured. She's been so focused on the house and the obvious bank accounts that she's ignored the real wealth." But my favorite part of the whole restructuring was what Daniel called the reverse Caroline. While my wife had been secretly moving money into hidden accounts, we were doing the exact opposite, making everything visible but untouchable. See, Caroline's strategy was to hide assets and then claim poverty, Daniel said, showing me a spreadsheet that looked like it had been designed by someone who spoke fluent mathematics. "But your strategy is to make everything completely transparent while making it legally impossible for her to access. We created a trust fund for the fictional children we'd never had, established charitable foundations that would make us look like philanthropists, and set up educational funds that could only be accessed for purposes that Caroline would never qualify for. Every penny was accounted for, every transaction was documented, but try to grab it without jumping through about 40 legal hoops? Good luck with that. The offshore components were Daniel's masterpiece. Not illegal, not hidden, just strategically located in jurisdictions that had legal systems designed by people who understood that wealth preservation was an art form. The Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, places where financial privacy wasn't just respected, it was practically a religious belief. Your wife wants to play hardball? Daniel asked as we finalized the last of the transfers. Let's see how she handles international banking laws and treaty obligations. By the end of the week, I was technically worth the same amount of money as before, but good luck proving it in a way that would satisfy a divorce court in Illinois. My assets were spread across so many legal entities, jurisdictions, and investment vehicles that untangling them would require a team of international lawyers and probably 6 months of court battles. The real genius was in the timing. Every transfer, every restructuring, every legal maneuver was completed just days before Caroline made her move. From the outside, it would look like routine financial management. From the inside, it was the most sophisticated defensive strategy I'd ever been part of. One last thing, Daniel said as we wrapped up our final meeting. Your wife has been watching your normal bank accounts, right? The ones she has access to. Probably. Good. Because we're going to make sure those accounts show exactly what she expects to see. Normal spending, normal deposits, normal suburban husband financial activity. Let her think she knows where all the money is. That night, I went home to Caroline's latest performance, something involving takeout Chinese food and fake concern about my stress levels. She asked about my day with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested in my well-being, and I told her about meetings and phone calls and routine business stuff. You've been working so hard lately, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Maybe you should think about slowing down, enjoying life more. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was my wife, who'd been planning my financial destruction for months, suggesting I should relax and stop worrying about money. It was like a serial killer recommending that their victim should really learn to trust people more. You're probably right, I said, squeezing her hand like a man who still believed his wife actually cared about his welfare. Maybe after we get through this busy season at work. That sounds perfect, she said, and for just a moment, I caught something in her eyes. Anticipation, excitement, the look of someone who thought their plan was about to pay off in a big way. Oh, Caroline, I thought as I watched her clear the dinner dishes with the efficient movements of someone who'd probably already mentally redecorated our house for her new life with Bradley. You have no idea what you're walking into. The financial fortress was complete, the legal ramparts were in place, and every asset that mattered was now protected by enough legal barriers to stop an army of divorce attorneys. Caroline could serve her papers whenever she wanted. I was ready for war. March 15th. The Ides of March. If Shakespeare were writing my life story, he probably would have chosen a different date for dramatic effect. But Caroline apparently wasn't much for literary symbolism. She was, however, excellent at theatrical timing, which is why she chose a cold Tuesday morning when the neighborhood was buzzing with the usual suburban activity. Kids waiting for school buses, commuters grabbing coffee, stay-at-home parents walking dogs, to stage her grand finale. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports and pretending to be a normal husband concerned with normal business things, when I heard the doorbell. Not unusual. We got plenty of deliveries, solicitors, and neighbors dropping by to borrow sugar or complain about someone's hedge growing too close to the property line. What was unusual was Caroline's voice, suddenly bright and cheerful, calling out, "I'll get it, honey." The enthusiasm in her tone was about as subtle as a fireworks display. This wasn't Caroline answering the door for a package or a Girl Scout selling cookies. This was Caroline answering the door for her moment of triumph. I stayed in my office, but I could hear everything through the thin walls of our supposedly soundproof house. Caroline's voice, overly surprised and concerned. A man's voice, official and apologetic. The rustle of papers being exchanged. The whole production was so carefully orchestrated that I almost wanted to applaud. "Tommy?" Caroline called out, and there was something in her voice. A tremor that could have been genuine emotion or could have been the result of months of rehearsing this exact moment. Could you come here for a minute? I found her standing in our foyer, looking like a woman who'd just received the worst news of her life. She was holding a thick manila envelope in one hand and clutching a tissue in the other, her eyes already red-rimmed with what appeared to be tears. Standing next to her was a sheriff's deputy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Mr. Thomas Mercer?" the deputy asked, consulting a clipboard like he was checking items off a very unpleasant grocery list. "That's me. I'm Deputy Martinez with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I'm here to serve you with legal documents in the matter of Mercer versus Mercer." He handed me an envelope that felt heavier than it should have, considering it was just paper. "You're being served with a petition for dissolution of marriage, a motion for temporary support, and a request for a protective order." A protective order. Of course, because apparently I was such a dangerous, unstable husband that my wife needed legal protection from my threatening presence. The same presence that had brought her flowers last week and listened patiently while she complained about the neighbor's dog barking. "Thank you," I said, taking the papers with what I hoped looked like stunned confusion. Is this really happening?" Caroline let out a sob that would have made soap opera actresses weep with envy. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so sorry. I tried to make it work, but I can't do this anymore." The deputy shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to escape this domestic drama as quickly as possible. "Mr. Mercer, you'll need to appear in court on the dates specified in those documents. You should probably contact an attorney." "Of course," I said, "because what else do you say when your wife has just legally declared war on you in front of a man with a badge and a gun?" "I understand." After Deputy Martinez left, probably grateful to get back to dealing with normal criminals instead of suburban marital warfare, Caroline and I stood in our foyer like two actors who'd forgotten their lines. The silence stretched between us, filled with 15 years of marriage that had apparently been building to this exact moment. "Caroline," I said finally, "what's this about a protective order?" Her performance shifted into a higher gear. More tears, more tissue clutching, more of that trembling voice that suggested she was a woman who'd been pushed to her absolute breaking point by a monster masquerading as a husband. "I was scared," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Your temper has been getting worse, and I just need some space to figure things out." My temper, right? The same temper that had never once been directed at her in anger, unless you counted my mild irritation about dishwasher loading techniques as domestic violence. But this was Caroline's masterpiece, the culmination of months of planning and preparation. She'd set the stage, arranged the props, and now she was delivering her Academy Award-worthy performance. "I don't understand," I said, playing my part as the confused husband. "When have I ever?" "Caroline, I've never hurt you. I've never even raised my voice to you." "You don't remember," she said, and there was something almost convincing about the way she said it. "The recordings, the things you've said. I have proof, Tommy. I have everything documented." Of course she did. The edited recordings, the manufactured evidence, the carefully crafted narrative that painted me as an abusive husband and her as the long-suffering victim. It was all there in those papers, probably presented with the kind of legal precision that would make a prosecutor proud. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents, playing the role of a man reading about his own character assassination for the first time. The petition for dissolution was standard stuff: irreconcilable differences, division of assets, all the usual divorce boilerplate. But the motion for temporary support was a work of art. Caroline wasn't just asking for alimony. She was asking for 70% of our assets, full ownership of the house, my car, and monthly support payments that would have made a lottery winner wince. According to these papers, I was apparently so wealthy that supporting Caroline in the lifestyle to which she'd become accustomed would require roughly the GDP of a small country. The protective order was the real masterpiece, though. It painted a picture of Thomas Mercer that was so completely divorced from reality that I almost looked around to see if there was another Thomas Mercer standing behind me. According to Caroline's sworn statement, I was a volatile, emotionally abusive husband who'd been escalating toward physical violence. She had recordings, witnesses, and documented evidence of my dangerous behavior. 70%. I said, looking up from the papers. "Caroline, this is everything we've built together." "I know," she said, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression, not remorse, but satisfaction. The look of someone who thought they'd just played their winning hand. But I need security, Tommy. After everything that's happened, I need to know I'll be okay. Everything that's happened. As if our marriage had been some kind of ongoing domestic nightmare instead of 15 years of suburban normalcy punctuated by the occasional disagreement about vacation destinations and whose turn it was to take out the garbage. I need to call a lawyer, I said, because that's what any normal husband would say when presented with papers that essentially accused him of being a monster and demanded most of his worldly possessions as compensation. Of course, Caroline said, her voice soft and understanding. Take all the time you need. I'll be staying with my sister for a while, until the court decides about the protective order. Her sister Claire, the same sister who'd probably been coaching Caroline through this whole performance, helping her rehearse her lines and perfect her victim act. I wondered if Claire knew she was harboring a woman who'd spent months planning one of the most elaborate cons I'd ever seen, or if she genuinely believed Caroline's story about her abusive husband. When are you leaving? I asked. Today, she said, and I noticed she didn't look around the house with any nostalgia or regret. I already packed some things. They're in my car. Of course they were. Caroline had probably been packed and ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to make her dramatic exit. This whole morning had been choreographed with the precision of a Broadway musical, right down to the timing of the sheriff's deputy and the strategic placement of tissue boxes. I watched my wife of 15 years walk upstairs to collect her remaining belongings, each step taking her further away from the life we'd built together and closer to whatever future she'd planned with Bradley Morrison. The house felt different already, like someone had rearranged all the furniture while I wasn't looking. When she came back down with a suitcase that looked suspiciously like it had been packed by someone who'd given this moment a lot of thought, Caroline paused at the front door. For a second, I thought she might say something real, an explanation, an apology, maybe even a moment of honesty about what she'd really been doing for the past several months. Instead, she gave me that same sad smile she'd been practicing, the one that suggested she was a woman forced into impossible circumstances by a husband who'd left her no choice. I really am sorry, Tommy, she said. I hope someday you'll understand why I had to do this. And then she was gone, leaving me alone in our house with a stack of legal papers that accused me of being someone I'd never been and demanded compensation for crimes I'd never committed. I stood in the sudden silence of my empty house, holding the documents that were supposed to destroy my life, and smiled. Caroline thought she'd just delivered the knockout punch. What she'd actually done was walk straight into the trap we'd been setting for weeks. Patricia was going to love this. The Cook County Courthouse is one of those imposing granite monuments to justice that makes everyone who walks through its doors feel like they're either about to get salvation or completely screwed over. On this particular gray Thursday morning, I was betting that both things were going to happen, just not to the people who expected them. I arrived early, partly because Patricia had drilled into me the importance of punctuality, and partly because I wanted to watch Caroline's grand entrance. After weeks of preparation, I was genuinely curious to see how she'd present herself for the main event. Would she go with traumatized victim? Wronged woman seeking justice? Or maybe she'd surprise me with something completely new from her repertoire of fictional personas. The courtroom itself looked like something out of a legal drama. All dark wood and high ceilings, with that particular smell that courtrooms have, like old papers and broken dreams seasoned with industrial-strength disinfectant. Judge Margaret Chen's bench dominated the room like a fortress, and the witness stand looked like an electric chair designed by someone with a law degree. Patricia sat beside me, reviewing her notes with the calm efficiency of a surgeon preparing for a particularly delicate operation. She was wearing what she called her intimidation suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with the kind of sharp lines that made opposing counsel nervous just looking at her. Remember, she murmured as people began filtering into the courtroom. Whatever happens today, you're the confused, hurt husband who still can't understand why his marriage fell apart. You're disappointed, you're sad, but you're not angry. Anger makes judges nervous. Got it. Wounded puppy, not rabid dog. Exactly. That's when Caroline made her entrance. And holy hell, she had outdone herself. If I thought her performance on my doorstep was impressive, this was like watching Shakespeare if Shakespeare had been written by someone with a master's degree in psychological manipulation. She was wearing a navy blue dress that managed to be both professional and vulnerable. Expensive enough to show she had taste, but not so expensive that she looked like she was rolling in money. Her hair was pulled back in a style that suggested she was too emotionally distraught to spend much time on personal grooming, and her makeup was subtle except for the slight redness around her eyes that suggested she'd been crying recently. But the real masterpiece was her body language. The way she walked into that courtroom, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, moving like someone who was forcing herself to be brave despite overwhelming fear. Even her breathing seemed calculated, quick and shallow like someone fighting off panic attacks. Behind her came her legal team, led by Raymond Keller, a lawyer who looked like he'd stepped out of a commercial for expensive divorce attorneys. Perfectly styled silver hair, a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and the kind of confident swagger that suggested he'd never met a wealthy husband he couldn't financially destroy. Following Keller was Caroline's parade of supporting players. Dana Fletcher, her best friend and star witness, dressed in what I could only describe as concerned friend chic. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a therapist who'd apparently been treating Caroline for the trauma of being married to me, looking appropriately grave and professional. And lurking in the back of the gallery like a guilty conscience was Bradley Morrison himself, trying to look like an innocent bystander instead of the home-wrecking gallery owner who'd been planning this whole circus. Judge Chun called the court to order, and Raymond Keller stood up to deliver his opening statement with the theatrical flair of someone who'd been practicing in front of a mirror for weeks. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying just the right note of righteous indignation. "We are here today because Caroline Mercer has finally found the courage to escape from a marriage that has become a prison of emotional and psychological abuse." Oh, this was going to be good. I settled back in my chair and prepared to watch Caroline's legal team paint me as the kind of monster who probably kicked puppies and stole Christmas presents from orphans. For 15 years, Keller continued, pacing in front of the judge like a prosecutor in a murder trial, my client has endured a pattern of controlling, manipulative behavior that has systematically stripped away her sense of self-worth and independence. He gestured toward Caroline, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table looking like she was barely holding herself together. On cue, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a woman summoning every ounce of strength just to be in the same room as her abusive husband. "Thomas Mercer," Keller said, turning to point at me like I was a war criminal, "presents himself to the world as a successful businessman and devoted husband. But behind closed doors, he is a different man entirely. Controlling, volatile, emotionally manipulative." I had to give him credit. Keller was selling this story with the conviction of someone who actually believed it. Either Caroline had fed him an incredibly convincing version of our marriage, or he was just really, really good at his job. My client has endured years of financial control, where every purchase had to be approved, every expense questioned, every attempt at independence crushed under the weight of his need to dominate every aspect of their shared life. Financial control. That was rich, considering Caroline had been secretly moving money into hidden accounts for months. But I kept my expression neutral, the picture of a man who couldn't understand why his reasonable fiscal responsibility was being characterized as abuse. When Caroline took the stand, the transformation was complete. Gone was any trace of the confident, scheming woman I'd discovered on that phone call. In her place sat a broken bird of a person, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper, pausing frequently to collect herself as she painted a picture of our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. "He never hit me," she said, and the way she said it suggested that physical violence would have been easier to bear than what she'd actually endured. But the emotional abuse was constant. The way he would dismiss my opinions, control our finances, make me feel like I was walking on eggshells all the time. She described incidents I barely remembered, casual conversations transformed through her testimony into episodes of psychological warfare. The time I'd questioned her spending on an expensive handbag became evidence of financial abuse. My request that she let me know when she'd be home late became proof of controlling behavior. Even my habit of organizing the dishwasher efficiently was somehow twisted into an example of my need to dominate our domestic life. I started recording our conversations, Caroline continued, her voice breaking just enough to suggest she was ashamed of having to resort to such measures, because I was starting to question my own memory. He would deny saying things, claim I was overreacting, make me feel like I was going crazy. Gaslighting. The classic abuser's tactic, according to Caroline's version of events. What she didn't mention was that she'd been the one manipulating those recordings, splicing together fragments of different conversations to create evidence that didn't actually exist. Dana Fletcher's testimony was a masterclass in loyal friendship taken to criminal extremes. She described tearful phone calls where Caroline had confided her fears, shared stories of my alleged controlling behavior, and painted herself as the concerned friend who'd been urging Caroline to seek help for years. She was afraid to leave him, Dana said, clutching a tissue like a prop in a community theater production. She thought he might hurt her or destroy her financially. She felt trapped. Dr. Martinez added the professional veneer that every good con job needs. As Caroline's therapist, she testified about the symptoms of emotional abuse she'd observed, the way Caroline had exhibited classic signs of someone living in a psychologically toxic environment. Mrs. Mercer displayed all the hallmarks of someone trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship, Dr. Martinez explained with the authority of someone who'd written papers on the subject. Anxiety, depression, a diminished sense of self-worth, and a persistent fear of her husband's reactions to normal domestic situations. The most damning part of Caroline's case was the audio evidence. Keller played recording after recording of what sounded like me being exactly the kind of controlling, verbally abusive husband that no reasonable judge would want to reward in a divorce settlement. "Caroline, you never listened to me," my voice rang out in the courtroom, followed by, "I'm sick of your attitude, and maybe I should just leave." Sitting there listening to my own voice, saying things I'd never actually said in that context, I had to admire the technical skill involved. Caroline had been working on this audio Frankenstein for months, carefully collecting fragments of different conversations and stitching them together into a narrative that painted me as an emotional terrorist. The financial evidence was equally impressive in its creativity. Caroline's team presented documents showing years of what they characterized as financial control, joint accounts that I supposedly monitored obsessively, credit cards with spending limits, investment decisions made without her input. What they didn't mention was that Caroline had never shown any interest in our finances beyond spending the money I earned. She'd never wanted to balance a checkbook, never asked to review investment statements, never expressed any desire to be involved in financial planning beyond choosing which restaurants we could afford. But now, through the magic of legal reframing, my responsible management of our household finances had become evidence of systematic financial abuse designed to keep her dependent and powerless. By the time Caroline's team finished presenting their case, they'd painted a picture of our marriage that was so convincing, so thoroughly documented, and so emotionally compelling that I almost started to feel sorry for the poor woman married to such a monster. Almost. Raymond Keller concluded his presentation with a flourish that would have made a Broadway director proud. "Your Honor, Caroline Mercer deserves justice. She deserves to rebuild her life free from the man who systematically destroyed her sense of self-worth for 15 years. She deserves fair compensation for the years she lost, the career opportunities she sacrificed, and the emotional trauma she endured." 70% of all marital assets, he said, letting the number hang in the air like a prayer to the goddess of divorce settlements. Substantial alimony to help her rebuild the life that Thomas Mercer's controlling behavior prevented her from living. And most importantly, the peace of mind that comes from knowing she'll never again have to live in fear of the man who promised to love and protect her. As Keller returned to his seat, I could see the satisfaction on Caroline's face. Not the broken, traumatized expression she'd been wearing for the cameras, but a fleeting moment of genuine pleasure. She thought she'd just delivered the performance of a lifetime. She had no idea that the real show was about to begin. When Patricia Hendress rose from her chair, the entire courtroom seemed to shift. It was like watching a predator wake up from a nap, graceful, deliberate, and absolutely terrifying if you happened to be the prey. She adjusted her jacket with the precision of someone checking a weapon, picked up a single file folder, and walked toward Judge Chen's bench like she was about to perform surgery on Caroline's entire case. "Your Honor," Patricia began, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. What we've just witnessed is indeed a masterful performance. Unfortunately for the plaintiff, it's been a performance of fiction, not fact. I watched Caroline's face carefully. For just a split second, something flickered behind her eyes. Not the broken vulnerability she'd been projecting, but something sharper. Alert. Like a con artist who'd just realized the mark might not be as stupid as they'd thought. Mrs. Mercer has painted a compelling picture of an abusive marriage, Patricia continued, opening her folder with the casual efficiency of someone who was about to ruin several people's entire day. She's presented audio evidence, witness testimony, and financial records that seem to support her claims. The only problem is, none of it is true. Raymond Keller was already on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making accusations without foundation. Mr. Keller, Judge Chin interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of patience that judges reserve for lawyers who are about to get educated. I'll allow Ms. Hendricks to present her case. You'll have your chance to respond. Patricia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel consider career changes. Thank you, Your Honor. Let's start with those compelling audio recordings we just heard. She gestured to Mark Sandler, who was sitting in the gallery with a laptop that looked like it belonged to NASA. Your Honor, I'd like to present the unedited versions of Mrs. Mercer's audio evidence. The first recording filled the courtroom, and I watched Caroline's face go from confident to confused to absolutely horrified as she heard my actual voice in its original context. Caroline, you never listen to me when I'm trying to explain why I had to work late tonight, my voice said clearly. I know it's frustrating, but this client meeting ran over. Then came the second recording. I'm sick of this traffic. We're going to be late for dinner with your parents. And the third, maybe I should just leave this party early. This networking event is putting me to sleep. The courtroom was dead silent as the implications sank in. Caroline had taken fragments of normal, innocent conversations and stitched them together to create evidence of abuse that had never happened. The woman who just testified about being gaslit had been gaslighting an entire courtroom. As you can hear, Your Honor, Patricia said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, Mrs. Mercer has been quite creative with audio editing software. What you heard in her presentation were pieces of different conversations, recorded over several months, and spliced together to create fictional evidence of abuse. Caroline's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she wasn't responding. She was staring at Patricia like someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. But the audio manipulation is just the beginning. Patricia continued, moving to her next exhibit like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. Mr. Sandler, would you please show the court exhibit B? The first photograph appeared on the courtroom's display screen, and I heard someone in the gallery actually gasp. It was Caroline and Bradley, sitting in that trendy cafe downtown, holding hands across the table and gazing at each other like they were starring in their own romantic comedy. The second photo showed them leaving the Morrison Gallery together, fingers intertwined. The third caught them entering the Meridian Hotel, both carrying overnight bags. These photographs, Patricia explained with the clinical precision of a pathologist describing a murder scene, were taken over the past 6 weeks. They document Mrs. Mercer's ongoing affair with her employer, Bradley Morrison, who I notice is sitting in the gallery today. Every head in the courtroom turned toward Bradley, who looked like he wanted to crawl under his seat and disappear. The man who'd been so confident about stealing another man's wife suddenly looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. Your Honor, Patricia continued, Mrs. Mercer hasn't just been lying about the state of her marriage. She's been systematically planning this divorce while conducting an affair, manipulating evidence, and coaching witnesses. She gestured toward Dana Fletcher, who had gone from concerned friend to deer in headlights in about 30 seconds. Ms. Fletcher, I believe you testified that you received tearful phone calls from Mrs. Mercer about her husband's abusive behavior. Dana nodded weakly, probably realizing she was about to become collateral damage in Caroline's imploding master plan. Interesting, Patricia said, pulling out another document. Because according to phone records, most of your conversations with Mrs. Mercer took place at your home address, not over the phone. In fact, we have audio recordings of you and Mrs. Mercer rehearsing testimony in your living room. The recording that played next was like listening to a really bad community theater rehearsal. Caroline's voice, clear and confident. Nothing like the broken whisper she'd used on the stand, coaching Dana on how to describe incidents that had never happened. Remember, make it sound like you were really worried about me, Caroline's voice instructed. Like you thought Thomas might actually hurt me. That's what sells the story. Should I mention the time he supposedly threw the coffee mug? Dana asked. No. We decided that one was too hard to verify. Stick to the emotional stuff, the controlling behavior, the financial abuse, the way he made me feel trapped. Judge Chin's expression had shifted from professional interest to something much colder. She was looking at Caroline like someone studying a particularly unpleasant specimen under a microscope. But Patricia wasn't done. Not even close. Your Honor, we also need to address the financial evidence presented by the plaintiff's team. Mrs. Mercer has claimed that she was financially controlled and abused by my client. The reality is quite different. The financial records that appeared on the screen told a story that was the exact opposite of everything Caroline's team had presented. Secret bank accounts, hidden transfers, money moved offshore, credit lines opened without my knowledge, all of it documented with the precision of a forensic accountant who'd had weeks to prepare. Mrs. Mercer has been systematically moving marital assets for the past 8 months, Patricia explained. Roughly $200,000 has been transferred to accounts that my client knew nothing about. This isn't financial abuse. This is fraud. Caroline's face had gone completely white. All the careful makeup, all the practiced vulnerability, all the theatrical preparation in the world couldn't hide the fact that she looked like someone who'd just realized they were about to go to prison. Furthermore, Patricia continued, building momentum like a freight train heading downhill. Mrs. Mercer has been using credit cards opened in my client's name to fund her affair. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts for Mr. Morrison, all charged to accounts that my client will be responsible for paying. She produced receipt after receipt, a paper trail of adultery funded by the man Caroline was trying to destroy in court. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She'd been using my money to pay for her betrayal. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case, Patricia said, her voice taking on the kind of grave tone usually reserved for war crimes tribunals, is the recordings we discovered of Mrs. Mercer and Mr. Morrison discussing their plans for this divorce. The final recording was the nuclear option, and Patricia played it with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. It was Caroline and Bradley, probably recorded in his car or office, discussing their strategy with the casual cruelty of 2 people planning to rob a bank. Once the divorce goes through, we'll have enough money to do whatever we want, Caroline's voice said, clear and confident and completely free of the traumatized victim persona she'd been performing. Thomas will never see it coming. He's so predictable, so trusting. It's almost too easy. 70% should be enough to set us up nicely, Bradley's voice added. Maybe we can finally take that trip to Europe you've been talking about. The best part, Caroline laughed, that genuine laugh I'd once loved hearing, is that he'll probably still think this is about our marriage problems. He has no idea I've been planning this for months. The silence that followed was the kind of absolute quiet that happens right before an earthquake. Judge Chun was staring at Caroline with an expression that could have frozen lava, and Caroline looked like she was about to faint. Raymond Keller was on his feet, but for the first time all day, he seemed to have lost his silver-tongued confidence. Your Honor, these recordings could have been taken out of context. Mr. Keller, Judge Chin said, and her voice carried the kind of authority that made grown lawyers whimper. I think we've heard quite enough context. She turned her attention to Caroline, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table looking like someone who'd just watched their own execution. Mrs. Mercer, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence? Caroline opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was completely speechless. The woman who'd had an answer for everything, who'd planned every contingency, who'd rehearsed every emotional response, had finally encountered a situation her acting skills couldn't handle. The truth. Patricia returned to her seat with the satisfaction of someone who'd just performed a perfect surgical procedure. She'd systematically dismantled every piece of Caroline's case, exposed every lie, and revealed the elaborate conspiracy for exactly what it was. Your Honor, she said as she sat down, I believe the evidence speaks for itself. It did indeed. And what it was saying was that Caroline Mercer had just made the biggest mistake of her life. If you've ever wondered what justice looks like when it's served ice cold with a side of poetic revenge, let me tell you, it's a beautiful thing to witness. Judge Margaret Chin sat behind her bench like an avenging angel in a black robe, and the look on her face suggested that she was about to deliver the kind of judicial smackdown that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. The courtroom had that electric tension you get right before a tornado touches down. Everyone knew something catastrophic was about to happen. They just weren't sure exactly how much devastation was going to be left in its wake. Caroline sat at the plaintiff's table looking like someone who'd just watched their house burn down while they were still inside it, and Raymond Keller had the expression of a lawyer who was already mentally drafting his malpractice insurance claim. Judge Chun took her time reviewing the evidence Patricia had presented, occasionally glancing up at Caroline with the kind of look that would make seasoned criminals consider confessing to crimes they hadn't even committed yet. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, broken only by the sound of Caroline's increasingly panicked breathing and the scratch of the court reporter's fingers flying across her stenotype machine. In 35 years on this bench, Judge Chin finally began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen every form of human deception imaginable. I have rarely encountered a case that represents such a calculated and systematic attempt to defraud both the court system and an innocent spouse. The words hit Caroline like physical blows. I watched her flinch with each phrase, her carefully constructed victim persona crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane. She kept glancing toward the gallery, probably looking for Bradley, but her knight in shining armor had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor and had vanished the moment Patricia started playing those recordings. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Chun continued, focusing her laser-like attention on my soon-to-be ex-wife. You have presented this court with fabricated evidence, perjured testimony, and a conspiracy to commit fraud that is breathtaking in both its scope and its audacity. Caroline tried to speak, opening her mouth like a fish gasping for air, but Judge Chun held up a hand that could have stopped a freight train. The audio recordings you presented as evidence of domestic abuse were deliberately manipulated to create fictional scenarios that never occurred. The financial abuse you claim to have suffered was, in fact, standard marital financial management, while you were simultaneously engaged in actual financial fraud, moving more than $200,000 into secret accounts. The judge's voice was getting sharper with each word, like a blade being honed on a whetstone. The emotional trauma you described so eloquently was apparently overcome quite easily when you were planning your scheme with Mr. Morrison, as evidenced by the recordings where you laugh about your husband's supposed predictability and discuss how to maximize your fraudulent settlement. I had to admit, hearing the judge systematically dismantle Caroline's case was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. This wasn't just justice. This was justice with style, delivered by someone who clearly didn't appreciate having her courtroom turned into a theater for elaborate con games. Furthermore, Judge Chun continued, the evidence shows that you coached witnesses to provide false testimony, staged fake crime scenes to simulate domestic violence, and engaged in a systematic campaign of character assassination against your husband, a man who, based on the actual evidence presented, appears to have been guilty of nothing more than working hard to support a household and marriage you were actively working to destroy. Raymond Keller finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual words. Your Honor, if I may. You may not. Judge Chin cut him off with the efficiency of a paper shredder. I'm not finished. She turned her attention back to Caroline, who had gone from pale to a shade of white that suggested she might be experiencing some kind of medical emergency. Mrs. Mercer, the recordings we heard today don't just reveal fraud. They reveal a complete lack of remorse, conscience, or basic human decency. You plan to destroy a man's reputation, steal his assets, and ruin his life, all while congratulating yourself on your cleverness. The judge paused, letting that assessment hang in the air like a toxic cloud. The court finds that not only are your claims of abuse completely without merit, but that you are guilty of fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. This is not a case of marital discord. This is a case of premeditated theft disguised as divorce proceedings. Caroline finally managed to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Your Honor, I can explain. Explain what, Mrs. Mercer? Explain how you accidentally recorded yourself planning to defraud your husband? Explain how you accidentally moved $200,000 into secret accounts? Explain how you accidentally manufactured evidence and coached witnesses to commit perjury. Judge Chin's tone suggested that Caroline would have better luck explaining how she'd accidentally become a professional bank robber. The only thing you need to explain is why this court shouldn't hold you in contempt and refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The mention of criminal prosecution hit Caroline like a bucket of ice water. She actually swayed in her chair, gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping her from falling over. Raymond Keller looked like he was considering whether he could claim that he'd been hypnotized or drugged when he agreed to take this case. However, Judge Chun continued, "This is a family court, not a criminal court, and my primary responsibility is to resolve the marital dispute before me. So let me make the court's findings absolutely clear." The judge said, "All assets to your ex-wife and her new husband." I smiled because she had no idea what was coming next. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and men? Well, turns out my wife Caroline had some pretty spectacular plans of her own, and I was about as welcome in them as a vegan at a barbecue competition. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you how my perfectly ordinary Tuesday turned into the kind of disaster that makes reality TV look like amateur hour. My name's Thomas Mercer, and up until about 3 hours ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Two-story colonial in the suburbs, white picket fence that I actually painted myself last summer like some kind of domestic superhero, and a wife who could make Pinterest boards weep with envy. Hell, I even had one of those lawn mowers that makes those satisfying diagonal stripes in the grass. The whole 9 yards, complete with a golden retriever that Caroline insisted we name Gatsby, because apparently we needed our dog to be as pretentious as our neighborhood book club. I'd been in Chicago for 3 days, schmoozing clients and pretending to care about quarterly projections while secretly counting down the hours until I could get back home. The meetings wrapped up early. Some miracle involving the CEO actually making a decision instead of forming another committee to think about forming a committee, so I decided to surprise Caroline. You know, the whole romantic husband returns early thing. Maybe we'd order Thai food, binge-watch something mindless on Netflix, and I'd listen to her complain about whatever drama was unfolding at that fancy art gallery where she worked. Typical married couple stuff. The drive back from O'Hare was pure hell, naturally. Chicago traffic has this special way of making you question every life choice that led you to that particular moment. Sitting in a metal box surrounded by other people in metal boxes, all of us collectively losing our minds at 5 miles per hour. But I was pumped. I had this whole mental movie playing out. Caroline's surprised face, maybe a little squeal of delight, definitely some quality time that didn't involve her scrolling through Instagram while I pretended to watch whatever cooking show she'd discovered that week. I pulled into our driveway around 4:30, noting that Caroline's silver BMW was parked at its usual angle that somehow managed to take up exactly 1 3/4 parking spaces. The woman could parallel park like she was conducting brain surgery, but give her a driveway, and suddenly geometry became her mortal enemy. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk, already mentally rehearsing my "honey, I'm home early" entrance. That's when I heard her voice drifting through the screen door. Now, here's the thing about eavesdropping. It's like opening Pandora's box, except Pandora's box is your marriage, and instead of unleashing evil upon the world, you're just unleashing evil upon your Tuesday afternoon. I should have announced myself. Should have walked right through that door, kissed my wife, and asked her about her day like a normal human being. Instead, I found myself frozen on my own front porch like some kind of suburban statue, listening to my wife of 15 years absolutely demolish my existence with the casual efficiency of someone ordering a latte. "Bradley, I know it's complicated, but we've talked about this." Her voice had that breathless quality she usually reserved for discussing vacation plans or new shoes. "The divorce papers are already drawn up. My lawyer says with his temper and the recordings I have, I'll get at least 70% of everything." "Recordings? What recordings?" I racked my brain trying to remember the last time I'd lost my temper. Last week I'd gotten mildly annoyed when she'd loaded the dishwasher wrong. Again, but I'd expressed my frustration by reorganizing the plates in silence like a proper passive-aggressive suburban husband. I know, she continued, and I could practically hear her twirling that strand of blonde hair she always played with when she was excited. Once this is over, we can finally be together. Really together. No more sneaking around, no more hotel rooms. Just you, me, and enough money to do whatever we want. Bradley Morrison, her boss at the Morrison Gallery. The guy I'd met at Christmas parties and office functions, with his perfectly groomed beard and his habit of pronouncing gallery like it rhymed with salary. The same Bradley who'd complimented my tie at their company picnic last summer while apparently planning to dismantle my marriage from the inside. Thomas will never see it coming, Caroline laughed, and the sound hit me like a brick to the solar plexus. It wasn't her fake laugh, the one she used at dinner parties when someone told a story that wasn't actually funny. This was genuine Caroline amusement, the kind I used to love hearing when we watched comedies together back, when we actually watched anything together. I stood there on my own porch, overnight bag in hand, listening to my wife discuss my financial destruction with the enthusiasm of someone planning a surprise birthday party. Except the surprise was on me, and instead of cake, I was apparently getting served with divorce papers and a side order of complete humiliation. He's so predictable, she went on. Works late, travels for business, never questions anything. Honestly, Bradley, sometimes I think he's more married to that lawn mower than he is to me. Okay, that hurt. I mean, yes, I took pride in my lawn care, but it wasn't like I'd ever chosen yard work over quality time with my wife. Although, come to think of it, quality time with Caroline lately had mostly involved listening to her complain about everything from the neighbor's dog to the temperature of her coffee to the general inadequacy of my existence as a human being. The recordings are perfect, she said, and my blood went from warm to absolute zero. I've been editing them for months. Just little clips here and there. Him losing his temper, raising his voice, sounding threatening. My lawyer says it's exactly what we need to prove he's unstable. 15 years. 15 goddamn years of marriage, of thinking we were building something together, of believing that the woman I'd pledged my life to actually gave a damn about that life. I thought about all those nights she'd seemed distant, all those times she'd claimed to be working late, all those weekends she'd suddenly developed an urgent need to visit her sister Claire in the city. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were slam-dunking themselves into place with the force of a meteor hitting Earth. I heard her moving around inside, probably pacing the way she did when she was really excited about something. I have to go, she said. He'll be back from Chicago tomorrow, and I need to practice looking surprised when he comes home. You know how he gets when he thinks something's wrong. Actually, Caroline, I get observant. There's a difference, though I was starting to realize you'd never bothered to learn it. The call ended, and I heard her footsteps heading toward the kitchen. I had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to play this. Walk in and confront her? Pretend I hadn't heard anything? Set the house on fire and claim insurance money? That last option was looking pretty tempting, not gonna lie. Instead, I took a deep breath, plastered what I hoped was a convincing smile on my face, and opened the front door like a man walking into his own execution. Honey, I called out, dropping my bag by the door. I'm home early. The war, I realized, had already begun. Caroline just didn't know I'd finally shown up to fight. If acting was an Olympic sport, Caroline would have taken home the gold, silver, and bronze medals while simultaneously coaching the entire U.S. team. The woman's performance when I walked through that door was nothing short of spectacular. The kind of acting that makes you wonder if she'd been practicing in front of a mirror for years, perfecting the art of being a lying, cheating wife. Tommy, she squealed, practically bouncing across the hardwood floors in those ridiculous fuzzy slippers she insisted on wearing everywhere. For a split second, I almost believed her excitement was genuine. Almost. But when you've just heard someone planning your financial execution with the enthusiasm of a kid planning Christmas morning, it's hard to buy into the whole loving wife routine. She threw her arms around me like I was a soldier returning from war instead of a husband back from 3 days of mind-numbing business meetings. Her perfume, that expensive stuff she bought at Nordstrom and claimed was an investment in our marriage, hit me like a cloud of betrayal-scented lies. I missed you so much, she breathed into my ear. And I had to fight the urge to ask if she'd missed me as much as she'd missed planning my destruction with Bradley the art gallery Romeo. Missed you too, sweetheart. I managed, my voice somehow staying steady despite the fact that my entire world had just been rearranged like furniture in an earthquake. Chicago was brutal. Nothing but conference rooms and bad coffee. Poor baby, she cooed, running her fingers through my hair the way she used to when we were actually happy. Or when I thought we were happy. At this point, I was starting to question whether our entire marriage had been one long con job with me as the mark. I made reservations at Chez Laurent for tonight. I thought we could celebrate you coming home. Chez Laurent, the fancy French place downtown where they charge $40 for what amounts to artistic arrangements of food on oversized plates. The same place where she'd probably practiced her innocent wife routine between plotting sessions with Bradley. I wondered if she'd rehearsed her surprised expression in their bathroom mirror, right between courses of overpriced duck confit. That sounds perfect, I said, because apparently I was now committed to this whole performance art piece we were creating together. The show must go on, even when the show is your marriage imploding in slow motion. For the next few hours, I got a front row seat to the Caroline Mercer masterclass in deception. She flitted around the house like a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide, chatting about her day at the gallery, complaining about traffic, asking about my meetings with the kind of interest that would have been touching if it wasn't complete bullshit. Oh, and the weirdest thing happened today, she said while putting on her makeup, applying mascara with the precision of someone painting the Sistine Chapel. Dana called and said she saw someone who looked exactly like you at that coffee shop on 5th Street. But you were in Chicago, so obviously it wasn't you. Dana Fletcher, Caroline's best friend since college, and her partner in what I was now realizing was probably a conspiracy that would make Watergate look like a middle school prank. I'd always thought Dana was harmless, just another suburban housewife with too much time and too many opinions about other people's business. Now I was wondering if she was part of Caroline's little support team, helping manufacture evidence of my supposed crimes against matrimony. That's weird, I agreed, watching her face in the mirror. Must have been my evil twin. She laughed, that fake laugh again, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. How long had she been practicing this? How many conversations had we had where she was essentially performing a one-woman show titled Innocent Wife Married to Terrible Husband? At dinner, Caroline outdid herself. She ordered wine like she was celebrating something special, touched my hand across the table like we were newlyweds, and told stories about the gallery with the kind of animated enthusiasm that would have been charming if I didn't know she was basically auditioning for the role of wronged woman in the upcoming production of Thomas Mercer Gets Screwed Over. Bradley's been such a pain lately, she said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. He's been micromanaging everyone, making all these demands about exhibition schedules. I swear, sometimes I think he forgets that some of us have lives outside of work. The casual way she said his name, like he was just some annoying boss instead of her co-conspirator in Operation Destroy Thomas, was almost impressive. I had to admire the sheer audacity of it. Here she was, probably still tasting his lies on her lips from whatever afternoon rendezvous they'd had, complaining about him like he was nothing more than an occupational hazard. Maybe he's just stressed, I suggested, taking a sip of wine that suddenly tasted like liquid irony. You know how these artistic types can be. Maybe, she said, but something flickered across her face, just for a second, like she was remembering something pleasant. Probably remembering how Bradley looked without his perfectly pressed gallery owner shirts. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of Caroline's greatest hits. Concerns about the neighbor's new fence, excitement about some upcoming gallery opening, complaints about the grocery store changing their produce layout. Normal married couple conversation, except nothing about it was normal anymore. Every word felt like part of an elaborate script, every smile like a costume she was wearing. When we got home, she made a big show of being tired, claiming all the excitement of my return had worn her out. She disappeared into the bathroom for her nightly routine, the same routine that apparently now included practicing her victim face in the mirror and probably texting Bradley about how well her performance was going. I sat on our bed, watching her move around the bedroom we'd shared for 15 years, and tried to process the fact that I was living with a stranger. This woman who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who could predict my reactions to movies before I had them, who'd seen me sick and healthy and everything in between. This woman was essentially a highly skilled actress who'd been method acting the role of my wife for God knows how long. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sliding under the covers beside me. Even her concern sounded rehearsed. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." She curled up next to me, resting her head on my chest the way she had thousands of times before. Except now it felt like sharing a bed with a very attractive, very dangerous con artist. Her breathing gradually slowed into the rhythm of sleep, but I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. More performances, more lies, more elaborate theater designed to make me look like the villain in my own life story. But now I knew I was watching a show, which meant I could start planning my own performance. If Caroline thought she was the only one who could play a role, she was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. You know that moment when you realize you've brought a butter knife to a gunfight? Yeah, that was me for about 12 hours after Caroline's little performance. But here's the thing about getting sucker punched by your own wife. It either breaks you or it makes you really, really focused. And buddy, I was about as focused as a laser beam cutting through steel. I spent that sleepless night doing what any rational person would do when they discover their spouse is plotting their financial assassination. I Googled best divorce lawyers near me, like my life depended on it. Because, let's face it, it kind of did. Caroline had clearly been planning this hostile takeover for months, maybe years, while I'd been living in blissful ignorance, worried about lawn care and quarterly reports like some kind of suburban amateur. The name Patricia Hendris kept popping up in every search, every legal forum, every best of list I could find. They called her the Shark, the Destroyer, and my personal favorite, the divorce attorney who makes other divorce attorneys cry. Her website looked like something out of a legal thriller, all sharp edges and testimonials that read like war stories from the trenches of matrimonial combat. I called her office at exactly 8 a.m., figuring I'd leave a message and maybe hear back in a few days. Instead, her secretary, who sounded like she could intimidate a Supreme Court justice, put me through immediately. "Mr. Mercer," came a voice that could cut glass. "I've been expecting your call." That stopped me cold. Expecting my call. "Your wife contacted several attorneys in the city last month, including myself." I declined to represent her. There was amusement in her voice, the kind that suggested she knew exactly how this story was going to end. Something about her approach didn't sit right with me. Professional instinct. Well, damn. Apparently Caroline's shopping for legal representation had been about as subtle as a marching band in a library. "Can you see me today? 2 o'clock. Don't bring any documents. We'll handle that later. Just bring your story and your checkbook." Patricia Hendris's office was located in one of those glass towers downtown that made you feel like you were entering the Death Star. The kind of building where people wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and where everyone walked like they were late for a meeting that would determine the fate of Western civilization. Her reception area looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to intimidate clients into honesty. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, and law books arranged with the precision of a military formation. The whole place screamed serious business, which was exactly what I needed because Caroline's little game was about as serious as business gets. When Patricia finally emerged from her office, I understood immediately why Caroline had walked away from this particular consultation. The woman was intimidating in the way that icebergs are intimidating. You could see the tip, but you knew there was a lot more danger lurking beneath the surface. She was probably in her 50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who charged by the precision of each stitch. But it was her eyes that really got your attention, sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. The kind of eyes that could spot a lie from 3 states away. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending a hand that gripped mine with the firmness of someone who'd spent decades crushing opposing counsel's arguments. "Let's talk." Her office was even more impressive than the reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, bookshelves lined with legal tomes that looked like they contained the secrets of the universe, and a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip for small aircraft. The walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings, bar association awards, and what looked like thank you letters from clients who'd probably walked out of their divorces with everything except their spouse's fillings. "So," she said, settling behind her desk like a general preparing for battle, "your wife is planning to ambush you with divorce papers, claims to have recordings of you being abusive, and is sleeping with her boss. Did I miss anything?" I blinked. "How did you?" "My wife said she respects only people she loves, and I'm not one of them. So I changed the locks, canceled every privilege in my name, and called her father pickup was tonight." No one argued. Well, here's the thing about second chances. They're like buying a lottery ticket after you've already been screwed over by the first one. You know the odds are garbage, but hope makes you stupid, and stupid makes you optimistic. My name is Marcus Hale, and at 42, I thought I had this whole learning from mistakes thing figured out. Spoiler alert. I absolutely did not. 3 years ago, I met Isabella at one of those fancy charity events where rich people write checks to feel better about their existential dread. You know the type: overpriced champagne, silent auctions for trips to Tuscany that nobody actually wants to take, and enough fake smiles to power a small town. I was there because my company expected it. She was there because, well, I never really figured out why she was there. Maybe she smelled opportunity the way sharks smell blood in the water. Isabella was the kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she commanded it. Magnetic doesn't even begin to cover it. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person worth talking to, even when you could see other guys orbiting around her like planets around the sun. Her laugh was infectious. Her smile could melt steel, and when she looked at you with those dark eyes, it felt like she was seeing straight through to your soul. Of course, what I thought was deep connection was probably just her calculating my net worth. But hey, hindsight is 20/20 and love makes you blind as a bat. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Here I was, a divorced dad with more baggage than a cross-country flight. And this incredible woman was actually interested in me. Not just interested, she seemed genuinely excited about building something together. She talked about family dinners, weekend trips, maybe even kids of our own someday. It was like someone had handed me a script for the life I'd always wanted but never thought I'd get a second shot at. Now, let me be clear about my situation going into this romantic comedy turned horror movie. I had 2 kids from my first marriage: Clara, who's 11 and sharp as a tack, and Jonah, who's 9 and has enough energy to power a nuclear reactor. My ex-wife Sarah and I had managed to split without completely destroying each other or traumatizing the kids too badly, which in today's world basically makes us candidates for sainthood. The kids spent half their time with me, half with her, and I was doing my best to be the kind of dad who shows up to every soccer game and still remembers to pack lunches that don't consist entirely of Pop-Tarts and good intentions. Isabella came into this ready-made family situation like she was born for it. She didn't have kids of her own, but she had big dreams about what we could build together. She talked about being a stepmom like it was her calling, about creating traditions and memories, about giving Clara and Jonah the stable, loving home they deserved. She painted this picture of Sunday morning pancakes and family game nights and vacations to Disney World where nobody fights about money or whose turn it is to change a diaper. And me, I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Because when you've been through a divorce, especially one that left you questioning whether you're actually capable of making anyone happy, meeting someone who seems to believe in your potential feels like winning the emotional lottery. Isabella made me feel like I wasn't just some divorced dad trying to figure out how to microwave dinosaur chicken nuggets without setting off the smoke alarm. I was a man worth loving, worth building a life with. So I gave her everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Financial stability? Check. I paid for her to go back to school and get her graduate degree in marketing because she said she wanted to build something meaningful and contribute to our future. That little investment set me back about 40 grand, but I figured it was an investment in us, in our shared dreams, in the woman I was planning to spend the rest of my life with. The house? Yeah, I bought us a house. Not just any house. A 4-bedroom colonial in one of those neighborhoods where the homeowners association sends you passive-aggressive letters if your grass is half an inch too long. It had a big backyard for the kids, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, and enough space for all of us to spread out and be comfortable. I put both our names on the deed because, hey, we were building a life together, right? And then there was her family. Oh, her family. The Morenos treated me like their personal ATM from day one. But I was so busy being in love and feeling grateful that someone like Isabella chose me that I didn't see the red flags until they were practically slapping me in the face. When her parents needed help with their mortgage after her dad's retirement didn't go as planned, guess who stepped up? When her sister Gabrielle needed someone to co-sign for her car loan because her credit was trashed, guess who got voluntold to help out? Every family emergency, every financial crisis, every just this once request landed on my doorstep with a smile and a promise that they'd pay me back eventually, that I thought I was being a good husband, a good son-in-law, a good man. I thought effort and generosity and showing up every single day would build the kind of love that lasts. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, I could create the perfect family I'd always wanted. I thought love was something you could earn through sheer determination and an open wallet. But here's what nobody tells you about effort. It's only valuable when the other person recognizes it, appreciates it, and reciprocates it. When someone takes your effort for granted, when they start to see your sacrifices as their entitlements, when your generosity becomes an expectation rather than a gift, you're not building love. You're building resentment on both sides, and setting yourself up for the kind of fall that leaves you wondering how you got so lost. Sometimes the people who don't want to see your effort are determined to stay blind to it, no matter how bright you try to shine. You know how they say the devil is in the details? Well, turns out the devil also lives in casual conversations over morning coffee and arguments about who forgot to pay the electric bill. The thing about marriage falling apart is that it doesn't happen all at once like in the movies. There's no dramatic music, no rain-soaked confrontation in a parking lot. Instead, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one so small you barely notice until you're bleeding out on your own kitchen floor. The cracks in our perfect little suburban dream started showing up about 6 months after we moved into the house. At first, they were hairline fractures, the kind of thing you could convince yourself was normal relationship stuff. Every couple has their issues, right? Every marriage goes through rough patches. I was a divorced guy, so I knew that relationships took work, that love wasn't always butterflies and rainbow unicorns farting glitter. But Isabella's issues weren't the normal, "You never put the toilet seat down," or "Why do you leave your socks on the bathroom floor?" complaints that most couples navigate. No, Isabella had a special talent for making comparisons that felt like psychological warfare disguised as casual conversation. She'd mention her ex-boyfriend Derek, who apparently was some kind of cross between Ryan Gosling and a motivational speaker. According to Isabella, Derek was passionate, the kind of guy who would surprise her with weekend trips to Napa Valley and write her poetry that didn't suck. Then there was Miguel, who was charming and could make her laugh until her sides hurt. Miguel apparently had this way of making every day feel like an adventure, even if they were just going grocery shopping or binge-watching Netflix on a Sunday afternoon. Isabella would get this dreamy look in her eyes when she talked about how Miguel could turn a mundane Tuesday into something magical just by being himself. And let's not forget about Jason, the ambitious one who was apparently destined to change the world one brilliant business idea at a time. Jason had vision. Jason had drive. Jason had the kind of magnetic personality that made everyone want to be around him. Jason also, coincidentally, never seemed to have any actual money. But Isabella glossed over that little detail whenever she brought up his many wonderful qualities to IT. First, I tried to be understanding about these trips down memory lane. Look, I'm not an idiot. I know that everyone has a past, and I didn't expect Isabella to pretend that I was her first relationship or that she'd never cared about anyone before me. Hell, I had my own history with Sarah, and there were things about my ex-wife that I still respected and appreciated. But there's a difference between acknowledging your past and using it as a weapon against your present. Every time Isabella brought up one of these paragons of masculine perfection, I felt a little smaller, a little less adequate, a little more like the consolation prize she'd settled for when the really good guys got away. I started second-guessing everything, the way I dressed, the way I talked, whether I was interesting enough or funny enough or spontaneous enough to keep her attention. I bought books on being more charismatic, started planning surprise date nights, even considered taking salsa dancing lessons because apparently Miguel was an amazing dancer that I told myself it was just insecurity talking, that Isabella didn't mean anything by these comparisons. Maybe she was just sharing her life with me, trying to help me understand who she was and how she'd gotten there. Maybe I was being too sensitive, reading malice into what was probably just nostalgia. After all, she'd chosen me, right? She'd said yes when I proposed. She'd moved into our house. She was building a life with me and the kids. Actions speak louder than words, and her actions said she wanted to be with me. But then came that night in November when everything shifted, when the paper cuts finally hit something vital, and I started hemorrhaging all over our brand new hardwood floors. We'd been arguing about money, specifically about how Isabella's credit card bills had somehow ballooned to the point where the minimum payments were eating up a significant chunk of our monthly budget. I wasn't trying to be controlling or unreasonable. I just wanted to understand how someone could spend $3,000 at Target in a single month. Like, what do you even buy at Target that costs $3,000? Did she purchase the entire houseware section? Was she stockpiling toilet paper for the apocalypse? Isabella got defensive, which I should have expected, but instead of just admitting that maybe she'd gone a little overboard with the retail therapy, she started attacking me for being cheap and controlling and obsessed with money. She accused me of trying to micromanage her life, of treating her like a child who couldn't be trusted with a credit card. She said I was sucking all the joy out of our relationship by constantly worrying about stupid things like budgets and financial responsibility. That I tried to stay calm, tried to explain that I wasn't trying to control her, that I was just concerned about our financial future, especially with 2 kids to think about. I reminded her that we had goals. We talked about maybe having a baby together someday, about taking family vacations, about saving for Clara and Jonah's college funds. All of that required some level of financial planning and restraint. That's when she looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not hurt, just cold and matter-of-fact, like she was explaining something obvious to someone particularly dense. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees as she delivered the words that would replay in my head for months afterward. "I only respect people I love," she said, her voice steady and emotionless. "And you're not one of them." The silence that followed was deafening. Not the kind of silence that falls between people who are too angry to speak, but the kind that happens when someone has just dropped a nuclear bomb in the middle of your living room, and you're still trying to figure out if you're dead or alive. I stood there like an idiot, trying to process what she'd just said, trying to find some way to misinterpret or misunderstand words that were pretty damn unambiguous. She didn't say it in the heat of anger, didn't scream it or throw it at me like verbal shrapnel. She said it calmly, like she was commenting on the weather or telling me we were out of milk. I looked at this woman who was wearing the engagement ring I'd spent 2 months' salary on, who was standing in the house I'd bought for us, who'd eaten the dinner I'd cooked an hour earlier, and I realized I was staring at a complete stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing her clearly for the first time. In that moment, everything clicked into place with horrible, crystal-clear precision. I wasn't her husband. I was her placeholder. I wasn't her partner. I was her convenience. All those comparisons to Derek and Miguel and Jason suddenly made perfect sense because they were the men she'd actually loved, actually respected. I was just the guy who paid the bills. Ever notice how once someone shows you who they really are, you can't unsee it? It's like one of those optical illusion pictures where you're staring at what looks like a vase, and then someone points out the 2 faces looking at each other, and suddenly you can't see the vase anymore no matter how hard you try. That's what happened after Isabella's little truth bomb in our kitchen. Suddenly, I had X-ray vision for all the bullshit I'd been willfully ignoring for 3 years. The morning after our "I don't respect you" conversation, I woke up expecting some kind of acknowledgement from Isabella. Maybe an apology, maybe an attempt to walk back what she'd said. Hell, even just some awkwardness about having nuked our marriage from orbit the night before. Instead, she was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, sipping coffee from the mug I'd bought her that said, "World's Best Wife." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Morning," she said without looking up, like she hadn't just casually informed me that our entire relationship was built on a foundation of her complete and utter lack of respect for me as a human being. That's when I started really paying attention to the little things I'd been brushing off as quirks or personality differences. Like how Isabella had this charming habit of cutting me off mid-sentence whenever we were talking to other people, usually to correct something I'd said or add her own commentary that completely derailed whatever point I was trying to make. I'd always told myself she was just enthusiastic, just eager to contribute to the conversation. Turns out, what I'd interpreted as enthusiasm was actually her way of letting everyone know that my opinions weren't worth listening to. Take our dinner party the previous weekend with the Johnsons from down the street. I was telling them about this documentary I'd watched about sustainable farming, and Isabella literally held up her hand like a traffic cop and said, "Oh, Marcus is on one of his environmental kicks again. Did you guys see that new Netflix series about the serial killer in Wisconsin?" Just completely steamrolled right over me like I was some boring uncle at Thanksgiving that everyone tolerates but doesn't actually want to hear from. And the eye rolling. Jesus, the eye rolling. I started keeping a mental tally of how many times Isabella's eyes did a full 360 whenever I asked her for what I thought were perfectly reasonable things. Could you pick up my dry cleaning since you're going to be near the strip mall anyway? Eye roll. Would you mind not leaving your coffee cups all over the house for me to collect like some kind of caffeinated Easter egg hunt? Eye roll. Do you think we could maybe discuss major purchases before you make them? Eye roll so dramatic it probably registered on the Richter scale. But the real education and how little respect I commanded in my own house came from watching how the Moreno family treated me. Isabella's parents had never exactly rolled out the red carpet for me, but I chalked that up to normal protective parent stuff. Every father thinks no man is good enough for his precious daughter, right? Every mother-in-law has opinions about how her daughter could have done better. I figured they'd warm up to me eventually once they saw how much I loved Isabella and how well I provided for her. Richard Moreno, Isabella's father, was a retired judge who carried himself like he was still presiding over cases from his lazy-boy recliner. The man had perfected the art of looking at me like I was something he'd accidentally stepped in during his morning walk. Every conversation, we had felt like a cross-examination where I was both the defendant and already guilty of whatever crime he'd decided I'd committed. He had this way of asking questions that weren't really questions, more like statements designed to make me feel inadequate. So Marcus, still working at that little consulting firm. Little consulting firm. Like the company that employed 30 people and had been in business for 15 years was some kind of lemonade stand I was running out of my garage. How's that house payment treating you? Pretty steep for someone in your situation. My situation being, apparently, not being wealthy enough to buy a house outright with cash like some kind of suburban drug lord. Isabella tells me you've been doing the cooking lately. That's modern of you. Modern. Like me making dinner for my own family was some kind of radical feminist experiment instead of just basic adult responsibility. And Gabrielle, Isabella's sister, was even worse because she wrapped her passive-aggressive bullshit in fake sweetness that made it harder to call out directly. Gabrielle had mastered the art of the backhanded compliment, the kind of comment that sounds almost nice until you really think about what she's saying. "Oh, Marcus, you're so good to Isabella. She's so lucky to have found someone who doesn't mind that she's out of his league. Thanks, Gabrielle. Really appreciate you pointing out that I'm dating up while simultaneously making it sound like charity work. It must be nice for Isabella to not have to worry about money anymore. I mean, after all those years of dating guys who were too proud to take care of a woman properly. Translation, you're not too proud because you don't have anything to be proud of, but at least you're useful. You know, Marcus, some men would be intimidated by Isabella's education and success, but you seem really comfortable with it. Comfortable with it. Like I should be threatened by my wife's graduate degree that I paid for. For 3 years, I'd endured this death by 1,000 cuts, telling myself that family relationships take time to develop, that they'd eventually accept me, that I was being too sensitive or reading too much into innocent comments. But once Isabella confirmed that I wasn't someone she loved or respected, all those little slights and microaggressions suddenly looked different. They weren't the growing pains of blending families. They were the natural result of everyone involved recognizing that I was the weak link in the chain. The worst part wasn't even the disrespect itself. It was the realization that I'd been complicit in my own degradation. Every time Richard made some snide comment about my career, I'd laugh it off or try to prove him wrong instead of telling him to shove his opinions where the sun doesn't shine. Every time Gabrielle delivered one of her sugar-coated insults, I'd smile and nod like she was giving me a compliment instead of calling her out for being a manipulative bitch. Every time Isabella dismissed me in front of other people, I'd make excuses for her behavior instead of demanding the basic respect that every human being deserves. I'd been so desperate to make this family work, so grateful to be included in their little circle, that I'd allowed them to treat me like hired help instead of like the man who was keeping their precious Isabella housed, fed, educated, and financially secure. I'd mistaken tolerance for acceptance and submission for peace. But tolerance isn't acceptance, submission isn't peace, and being useful isn't the same thing as being valued. Once I understood that distinction, everything else started to make sense. You know what's funny about rock bottom? It's not actually the worst place to be. Rock bottom is solid ground, and sometimes that's exactly what you need to push off from to start swimming back to the surface. That Friday night, sitting in my home office while Isabella cackled at some TikTok video in the living room like she hadn't just blown up our marriage 48 hours earlier, I finally hit that solid ground. It was one of those November evenings where winter is knocking on the door but hasn't quite moved in yet. The kids were at Sarah's for the weekend, which meant the house had that weird quiet feeling it gets when there's no one around asking for snacks every 5 minutes or arguing about whose turn it is to walk the dog we don't even have. Just me, Isabella, and the sound of her completely ignoring my existence while I paid all the bills that made her comfortable lifestyle possible. I'd been going through our monthly expenses, which had become about as fun as getting a root canal without anesthesia. Isabella's spending had reached levels that would make a Kardashian blush. $3,000 at Target was apparently just the tip of the iceberg. There was also the $1,500 at Sephora because apparently she needed enough makeup to supply a small theater company. The $800 at Lululemon because regular yoga pants don't cost enough to make you feel superior to other people, and my personal favorite, the $1,200 she'd spent on something called wellness coaching, which, as far as I could tell, involved paying some woman with a fake British accent to tell her that her chakras were misaligned. But here's the thing about that Friday night. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy and makes you do stupid things like throw dishes or write passive-aggressive notes that you leave on the refrigerator. What I felt was something completely different. It was cold and clear and sharp as a surgical knife. It was the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what's really going on. I pulled out a yellow legal pad. Old school, I know, but there's something about writing things down by hand that makes them more real than typing them on a computer. At the top of the page, I wrote, monthly expenses, Marcus Hale pays for. Then I started making a list, and let me tell you, it was like watching a horror movie where you're screaming at the protagonist to not go into the basement, except I was both the protagonist and the person watching. The mortgage, $2,800 a month for a house that Isabella got to live in while contributing exactly $0 toward. Utilities, gas, electric, water, trash, internet, cable. Another $400 a month, so Isabella could keep the house at a tropical 75 degrees in winter while binge-watching reality shows about rich women throwing drinks at each other. Cell phones. Both lines, naturally, because God forbid Isabella should have to figure out how to pay for her own communication device. That was another $160 a month for the privilege of receiving text messages about how I was failing as a husband. Car insurance. Isabella's BMW wasn't going to insure itself, and apparently her driving record was about as stellar as her respect for me. Another $180 a month. Streaming services. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney+, HBO Max, Apple TV, and something called Peacock that I was pretty sure was just NBC, trying to make me pay for shows I could watch for free. Isabella had to have access to every piece of entertainment content ever created, which cost us about $60 a month. Her gym membership. $200 a month for a fancy place with eucalyptus towels and sparkling water on tap, because apparently breaking a sweat at Planet Fitness like a normal person would have been beneath her newly refined sensibilities. The credit cards. This was the big one. The financial equivalent of a tumor that kept growing no matter how much money I threw at it. Between the minimum payments on her various plastic fantastic adventures, I was looking at about $800 a month just to keep her from completely destroying our credit score. Her student loans. Remember that graduate degree I so generously financed? Well, it turns out that even though I paid for the tuition out of pocket, Isabella had still taken out loans for living expenses, which apparently meant maintaining her lifestyle while pretending to be a poor student. Another $300 a month. I sat there staring at this list, doing the math in my head, and realized that I was spending almost $5,000 a month just to subsidize the lifestyle of someone who had recently informed me that I wasn't worthy of her love or respect. $5,000. That's 60 grand a year. $60,000 annually to bankroll my own emotional abuse. But here's what really got me. It wasn't just the money. Money is just paper, just numbers on a screen, just a tool that you can earn more of if you're willing to work for it. What really twisted the knife was the realization that Isabella had never once, not even once, acknowledged that any of this was a gift. She didn't see my financial support as generosity or sacrifice or even basic partnership. She saw it as her due, her entitlement, her natural right as my wife to have me fund her existence while she treated me like something she'd scraped off her chute. I thought about all those conversations we'd had about money over the years, how she'd accused me of being controlling whenever I suggested that maybe we should have a budget, how she'd rolled her eyes when I tried to talk about saving for the future, how she'd made me feel like some kind of miser for wanting to understand where our money was going. She'd weaponized my own generosity against me, made me feel guilty for even questioning expenses that would have made a lottery winner nervous. And suddenly, sitting there in my office with that yellow legal pad and the sound of Isabella's laughter echoing from the living room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, bone-level calm that comes when you finally understand what needs to be done. If Isabella didn't see me as someone worthy of love or respect, then why was I acting like someone obligated to provide for her every want and need? If I was just a paycheck to her, a convenient source of funding for her lifestyle, then what exactly was I getting out of this arrangement besides the privilege of being emotionally neglected by someone with expensive taste? For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't trying to figure out how to make Isabella happy, or how to earn her affection, or how to prove that I was worthy of her love. I was simply recognizing a basic economic principle. You don't continue to invest in something that gives you no return, that I would no longer finance my own disrespect. There's something almost therapeutic about burning bridges when you finally realize they only led to places you never wanted to go in the first place. That Saturday morning, while Isabella was still sleeping off whatever wine and Netflix combo had kept her up until 2 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, my laptop, and a sense of purpose that felt better than any antidepressant Big Pharma ever cooked up. That I'd made my decision. But now came the fun part, the execution. And let me tell you, there's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from methodically dismantling the financial safety net of someone who's spent years treating you like their personal ATM, while simultaneously letting you know that you're not good enough to deserve their basic human decency. First up, the cell phone. Isabella's iPhone was practically surgically attached to her hand, which made it the perfect place to start. I called Verizon and explained that I wanted to remove a line from our family plan. The customer service rep, bless her heart, tried to talk me out of it. Are you sure, Mr. Hale? You'll lose the family plan discount, and it might actually cost you more to have just one line. I'm absolutely positive, I told her, and I need this to take effect immediately. Well, we can do it right now, but the other phone will lose service within the hour. Perfect. That's exactly what I'm going for. Next was the streaming services. Isabella had insisted we needed every possible platform because, according to her, missing out on the latest true crime documentary or reality show about housewives throwing wine at each other would basically be cultural suicide. I logged into Netflix first and changed the password to something Isabella would never guess. Respect is earned 2024. Then I did the same with Hulu, Amazon Prime, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Apple TV, and that weird Peacock thing that I was pretty sure nobody actually watched. The banking was a little trickier, but not by much. I called our credit card company and explained that I needed to freeze the cards associated with Isabella's name. The representative asked if they were lost or stolen. Not lost, I said, but definitely not authorized for use anymore. Sir, I need to clarify. Are these cards that you're an authorized user on, or are you the primary account holder? I'm the primary account holder on everything. My wife is the authorized user, and I'm removing her authorization. There was a pause. Okay, Mr. Hale, I can certainly do that for you. The cards will be deactivated within the next few minutes. Would you like us to issue you a new card with a different number? That would be fantastic. The car insurance took all of 3 minutes. Isabella's BMW was insured under my policy, and all it took was a phone call to remove her from coverage. The insurance agent asked if she'd be getting her own policy. That's between her and whatever insurance company she chooses to go with, I said. My responsibility for her driving ends today. The gym membership was almost too easy. I logged into the account online and canceled her membership effective immediately. The system asked if I wanted to provide a reason for cancellation. I typed, "No longer married," to someone who respects the person paying for their membership, but then deleted it and just selected moving from the drop-down menu. No point in being petty when you're already being thorough. By noon, I had systematically removed Isabella from every financial benefit she'd enjoyed as my wife. Every privilege, every convenience, every little luxury that she'd taken for granted was gone faster than a Kardashian marriage. And the beautiful thing was, it was all completely legal and totally within my rights. Amazing how much power you have over your own money when you finally decide to use it. I made myself a sandwich, turkey and Swiss on sourdough, nothing fancy, and sat back down at the kitchen table to wait. Isabella usually didn't surface until around 1 on weekends, which meant I had about an hour to mentally prepare for what was about to be either the most satisfying conversation of my marriage or the most nuclear argument we'd ever had. Possibly both. At exactly 1:15 p.m., I heard the shower turn on upstairs. Isabella's weekend routine was as predictable as clockwork. Wake up, spend 20 minutes scrolling through social media in bed, shower, spend another 20 minutes on her skincare routine that involved more products than a small pharmacy, then come downstairs expecting me to have coffee ready and probably some kind of elaborate brunch prepared. At 1:47 p.m., I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the kitchen wearing one of those athleisure outfits that cost more than most people's car payments. Her hair perfectly styled despite having just gotten out of the shower, looking like she was ready for a photo shoot for Women Who Marry Well magazine. "Morning, babe," she said, heading straight for the coffee maker without looking at me. "What's the plan for today?" "I was thinking we could go to that new brunch place downtown, maybe do some shopping after. Anthropologie is having a sale, and I saw this dress that would be perfect for the Morrisons' party next weekend." She grabbed her phone from the counter, and immediately her face scrunched up in confusion. "Weird, I'm not getting any signal. Is the Wi-Fi down or something?" "The Wi-Fi's fine," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Your phone line has been disconnected." She looked at me like I'd just told her that Gravity had been canceled. "What do you mean disconnected?" "I mean I called Verizon this morning and removed your line from our plan. Your phone no longer has service." Isabella stared at me for a long moment, then let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Very funny, Marcus. What's really going on?" "That is what's really going on. I also changed the passwords on all the streaming services, froze your credit cards, canceled your car insurance, and terminated your gym membership. Effective immediately." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious." I stood up and walked over to where she was standing, close enough that she could see I wasn't joking, wasn't angry, wasn't having some kind of breakdown. I was just done. "You told me 2 nights ago that you only respect people you love, and that I'm not one of them. So I spent some time thinking about what that means, and I realized you're absolutely right. If I'm not someone you love or respect, then I'm also not someone who's obligated to finance your lifestyle." "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. You can't just..." "I can, and I did. Respect isn't free, Isabella. You want to be married to someone who pays for your phone, your credit cards, your insurance, your entertainment, your gym membership, and everything else? Then you need to be married to someone you actually respect. Since that's not me, according to you, then I'm not your provider anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time in 3 years, absolutely nothing came out. And in that moment of stunned silence, I realized something beautiful. I was finally free. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day where the sky looks like it's been scrubbed clean and the air has that crisp bite that makes you feel more awake than any amount of caffeine ever could. I woke up before my alarm, which was unusual, but then again, everything about the last 48 hours had been unusual. Isabella had spent most of Saturday alternating between furious silence and tearful attempts to convince me that I was having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown, but I'd held firm. No negotiation, no discussion, no, let's work this out over couples therapy bullshit. The financial support was over, period, End of sentence. But cutting off the money was just the first step. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it required Isabella to be out of the house for a few hours. Fortunately, she'd made plans to go shopping with Gabrielle, probably to complain about what an unreasonable monster I'd turned into overnight, and to figure out how to guilt me back into funding her lifestyle. What she didn't know was that while she was gone, I was going to make sure that when she came back, she wouldn't be able to get back in at 9 a.m. sharp. A locksmith van pulled into my driveway. I'd called Rodriguez and Son Saturday night and paid extra for Sunday service, which told you something about how serious I was about this whole operation. Miguel Rodriguez was a stocky guy in his 50s who'd probably seen every kind of domestic drama you could imagine, and he had the kind of weathered face that said he didn't ask questions he didn't need answers to. "You want all the locks changed?" he asked, looking at the front door, the back door, and the side entrance that led into the garage. "Everything, and I need it done fast. My wife should be gone for about 3 hours, and I want this finished before she gets back." Miguel nodded like he'd heard this story 1,000 times before. "Deadbolts too. Deadbolts, doorknobs, everything. And I need 3 sets of keys. One for me, one for my daughter, and one for my son. What about your wife? She won't be needing keys." Miguel's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrow. "All right then. This'll take me about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours tops. You want the good stuff or the cheap stuff?" "The good stuff. Money's no object for this particular project." While Miguel worked on transforming my house into Fort Knox, I tackled the next item on my agenda: packing Isabella's belongings. Now, I want to be clear here. I wasn't throwing her stuff in garbage bags and dumping it on the lawn like some kind of redneck Jerry Springer episode. I'm not a savage. I went to Target, bought a bunch of those clear plastic storage containers, and methodically packed everything that belonged to her with the same care I'd shown her for 3 years. The care she'd never appreciated or acknowledged, but care nonetheless. Her clothes filled 8 containers. 8. I'm talking about enough outfits to supply a small boutique, including shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent and handbags that probably had their own insurance policies. Her makeup and skincare products filled 2 more containers, and I swear some of those little jars cost more per ounce than gold. Her books, her knickknacks, her collection of candles that all smelled like vanilla bourbon or autumn leaves, or whatever scent was supposed to make you feel sophisticated. Everything went into containers, labeled with a black Sharpie in my neatest handwriting. The jewelry was trickier. Obviously, her engagement ring and wedding band were hers to keep, along with all the other jewelry she'd accumulated over the years. But there were a few pieces I'd given her for birthdays and anniversaries that had more sentimental value than monetary value, and I found myself hesitating over those. Then I remembered her words from Thursday night. "I only respect people I love, and you're not one of them." And into the container they went. If I wasn't someone she respected, then gifts from me probably didn't mean much to her anyway. Miguel finished with the locks. At 11:30, tested each one twice, and handed me 3 sets of shiny new keys. "You want me to stick around?" he asked. "Sometimes these situations get complicated." "No, but I appreciate the offer. I think I can handle it from here." "All right then. Good luck, man." After he left, I arranged Isabella's containers in neat rows on the front porch, covered them with a tarp in case it rained, and then went inside to wait. The house felt different somehow, lighter, like someone had opened all the windows and let out 3 years' worth of stale air. I made myself a sandwich, opened a beer even though it wasn't even noon yet, and sat down in my living room to think about what I was going to say when Isabella came home at 2:15 p.m. My phone rang. Isabella's name popped up on the screen, which was ironic considering her phone didn't actually have service anymore. She must have been using Gabrielle's phone or maybe the Wi-Fi at whatever coffee shop they'd landed in to lick their wounds and plot their counterattack. "Marcus," she said, and I could hear the barely controlled panic in her voice. "I can't get in the house." "That's correct." There was a pause, like she was trying to process the fact that I'd actually followed through on something for once instead of just threatening and then backing down like I usually did. "What do you mean?" "That's correct. I mean exactly what I said yesterday. You told me you don't love or respect me, which means I'm not your provider anymore. And if I'm not your provider, then this isn't your house." "Marcus, this is insane. You can't lock me out of my own home. Actually, it's not your home. Your name might be on the deed, but you've never paid a dime toward the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, or any other expense associated with this property. Legally and practically, this is my house that I was generously allowing you to live in. That generosity has now expired. I could hear Gabrielle in the background, probably coaching Isabella on what to say, or maybe calling her own husband to complain about what an unreasonable bastard I was being. Where am I supposed to go? Isabella asked, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely scared. I honestly don't know, and frankly, it's not my problem to solve anymore. But I will say this. Your belongings are packed neatly on the front porch, covered with a tarp so they won't get wet. I suggest you arrange to have them picked up soon. This is extreme, Marcus. Marriage is supposed to be about working through problems together. You're absolutely right. Marriage is supposed to be about mutual love, respect, and partnership. But you made it very clear that you don't love or respect me, which means we don't actually have a marriage. We have a financial arrangement that I've decided to terminate. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. So that's it. You're just giving up on us. No, Isabella. You gave up on us a long time ago. I'm just finally accepting reality. If you've never had the pleasure of watching entitled people realize that their free ride is over, let me paint you a picture. It's like watching someone try to use an expired credit card at a luxury store. There's denial, then anger, then bargaining, then more anger, and finally a kind of stunned disbelief that the world doesn't actually revolve around them. I got a front row seat to this psychological circus at exactly 6:30 that evening when Richard Moreno's silver Lexus pulled into my driveway like he was arriving to foreclose on a mortgage. I'd been expecting this, of course. There was no way Isabella was going to handle this situation with any kind of dignity or self-reflection. No, she was going to run straight to Daddy and let him fight her battles for her, because that's what entitled people do when reality comes knocking. They call in the cavalry and hope that someone with more authority can bully the world back into the shape they prefer. Richard climbed out of his car wearing what I like to call his judge face, that stern, disapproving expression he'd perfected over 30 years on the bench, the one that was supposed to make you feel like you were guilty of something even if you'd never so much as jaywalked. Gabrielle emerged from the passenger side, looking like she was heading to a funeral, all black clothes and dramatic sunglasses, even though the sun was already setting. And Isabella, well, Isabella looked like someone who'd spent the day crying in coffee shops and getting her ego stroked by people telling her what a victim she was. I watched this little parade of dysfunction march up my front walk from my living room window, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total calm. No anxiety about confrontation, no desperate need to explain myself or justify my actions, no urge to apologize for finally standing up for myself. Just a deep, settled peace that comes from knowing you're absolutely, 100% in the right. The doorbell rang. I let it ring again. Then I heard Richard's voice through the door, using his courtroom tone like he was calling court to session. Marcus, open this door. We need to talk. I took my time walking to the front door, stopping to check my hair in the hallway mirror and straighten my shirt. When I opened the door, I was met with 3 faces that looked like they'd been expecting me to grovel and beg forgiveness. Instead, they got a man who looked like he'd just had the best night's sleep of his life. Richard, Gabrielle, Isabella. I nodded to each of them like I was greeting casual acquaintances. What can I do for you? Richard's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. What can you do for us? Marcus, this is absolutely unacceptable behavior. You cannot lock your wife out of her own home. Actually, I can and I did. And it's not her home. It's my home that I was allowing her to live in rent-free until she made it clear that she doesn't respect the person paying for her lifestyle. That's not how marriage works. Gabrielle jumped in, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. You don't just get to kick someone out because you had a fight. I looked at Gabrielle with the kind of patience you usually reserve for explaining basic math to a particularly slow kindergartner. We didn't have a fight, Gabrielle. Isabella made a very clear statement about her feelings regarding our relationship. I'm simply responding appropriately to that information. Isabella finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a whine than actual words. Marcus, please. You're being ridiculous. You can't expect me to take everything I said completely literally. Oh, But I can, I said, leaning against my doorframe with my arms crossed. See, when someone tells you they only respect people they love and that you're not one of them, that's what we call a definitive statement. It's not ambiguous. It's not open to interpretation. It's a clear declaration of how you view our relationship. Richard puffed himself up like an angry peacock. Marriage requires patience, Marcus. You work through problems. You don't abandon ship at the first sign of trouble. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The chance to explain basic human dignity to a man who'd spent his career supposedly upholding justice, but apparently never learned the difference between respect and tolerance. Patience, I said, looking Richard dead in the eye, is built on a foundation of mutual respect. Without respect, there's nothing to be patient about. There's just one person accepting poor treatment from another person who feels entitled to give it. But she's your wife. Gabrielle protested, like that title was some kind of magic spell that made abuse acceptable. Being someone's wife doesn't give you the right to treat them like garbage, I replied. And being someone's husband doesn't obligate you to fund your own disrespect indefinitely. Isabella stepped forward, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize, might show some recognition of how her words and actions had brought us to this point. Instead, she went straight to emotional manipulation. You're abandoning me, Marcus. How can you just throw away 3 years like they meant nothing? The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a woman who'd just spent 3 years treating me like an ATM with legs, who'd explicitly told me she didn't love or respect me, who'd compared me unfavorably to every man she'd ever dated, now trying to make me feel guilty for refusing to continue subsidizing my own emotional abuse. I'm not throwing away anything, Isabella, I said, my voice steady and calm. You threw away our marriage the moment you decided I wasn't worth your respect. I'm simply acknowledging what you already made clear. We don't have a relationship based on love and mutual respect. We have a financial arrangement that I've chosen to terminate. This is cruel and unusual punishment. Richard bellowed, apparently forgetting that he was no longer in a courtroom and that marital disputes don't fall under the Eighth Amendment. No, I said, finally letting some steel creep into my voice. Cruel and unusual punishment is spending 3 years being told you're not good enough by someone whose entire lifestyle you're funding. Cruel and unusual punishment is having your contributions ignored, your efforts dismissed, and your worth measured solely by your ability to pay other people's bills. What I'm doing is called self-respect, and it's long overdue. Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? I gestured toward the neat rows of storage containers on my front porch, covered with the tarp to keep them dry. Your belongings are right there, packed carefully and ready for transport. As for where you go and what you do, that's entirely up to you. You're an adult with a graduate degree that I paid for. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You can't be serious about this, Richard said. But his bluster was starting to deflate as he realized that his intimidation tactics weren't working on someone who'd finally stopped caring about his approval. I'm completely serious. More serious than I've been about anything in years. I straightened up and prepared to deliver the closing argument. Isabella made a choice when she told me I'm not someone she loves or respects. I'm simply honoring that choice by removing myself from the position of supporting someone who views me with contempt. The silence that followed was beautiful. You know what's funny about small suburban neighborhoods? Information travels faster than gossip at a church potluck, and everyone suddenly becomes a marriage counselor with strong opinions about situations they know absolutely nothing about. By Monday morning, the news that Marcus Hale had locked his wife out of their house was making the rounds faster than a stomach bug at a daycare center. I discovered this delightful fact when I stepped outside to grab my newspaper. Yes, I still get the actual paper because I'm apparently ancient, and found my neighbor Janet Peterson practically lurking behind her mailbox like some kind of suburban spy. Janet was the self-appointed mayor of our little cul-de-sac, the kind of woman who knew everyone's business and felt personally responsible for maintaining what she called neighborhood standards, which was basically code for making sure nobody did anything that might lower property values or offend her delicate sensibilities. "Morning, Marcus," she called out, with that fake casual tone people use when they're fishing for information. "Everything okay? I saw Richard's car here yesterday evening, and there seemed to be some discussion happening on your front porch." "Discussion?" That was a polite way of describing what had essentially been a three-person intervention designed to shame me back into financing Isabella's lifestyle, while she treated me like something she'd scraped off her designer shoes. Everything's fine, Janet. Just working through some domestic issues. Oh. She looked disappointed that I wasn't going to spill all the juicy details right there on the sidewalk at 7 in the morning. Well, if you need anything. I mean, marriage can be so challenging these days. Translation. I'm dying to know what happened, and I'm going to spend the rest of the day calling every woman in the neighborhood to speculate about your personal life. That be why the time I got to work, my phone had already started buzzing with calls and texts from people who'd apparently heard various versions of the story. My buddy Dave from college sent a text that said simply, "Dude, did you really change the locks?" My sister called to ask if I was having a nervous breakdown. Even my ex-wife Sarah texted to ask if the kids should be concerned about their living situation when they were with me. The really interesting calls, though, came from people I hadn't heard from in months. Suddenly, everyone wanted to have lunch, grab a beer, or catch up, in ways that were obviously just excuses to get the real story straight from the source. It was like being a celebrity, except instead of being famous for something cool like making movies or hitting home runs, I was famous for finally growing a backbone at age 42. The reactions fell into predictable categories. There were the people who thought I was completely justified, usually other divorced guys who'd been through their own version of this particular hell. These were the men who'd had their contributions dismissed, their efforts ignored, their self-respect slowly eroded until they finally said enough was enough. They didn't need the details. They just needed to know that someone else had finally drawn a line in the sand and refused to let it be crossed. Then there were the people who thought I was being too harsh, too extreme, too unwilling to work on the relationship. These were mostly married women who'd apparently never been told by their spouse that they weren't worthy of love or respect, or men who'd been so thoroughly beaten down by their own relationships that they couldn't imagine standing up for themselves. They talked about compromise and communication and giving people second chances, as if I hadn't spent 3 years doing exactly that while Isabella systematically destroyed whatever respect I'd once had for myself. The most interesting reactions came from people who'd actually spent time around Isabella and me as a couple. These were the friends who'd watched her dismiss my opinions at dinner parties, who'd seen her roll her eyes when I spoke, who'd witnessed the way she treated me like hired help rather than a partner. They didn't need explanations because they'd been watching the slow-motion car wreck of our marriage from the beginning. My friend Tom, whose wife Karen was part of Isabella's little social circle, called me Tuesday afternoon with what he described as intelligence from behind enemy lines. Karen came home from coffee with the girls yesterday, and apparently Isabella is painting herself as the victim of some kind of abusive husband who went crazy and kicked her out without warning, he said. But here's the thing. Karen has eyes, and she's been watching how Isabella treats you for 3 years. She told me that if some woman talked to her the way Isabella talks to you, she'd have divorced him before the appetizers arrived. This was validation I hadn't realized I needed. For so long, I'd wondered if I was being too sensitive, if I was misinterpreting Isabella's behavior, if maybe the problem really was me and my inability to make her happy. Hearing that other people had noticed the disrespect, had been uncomfortable watching it, made me realize that I hadn't been imagining things. But the most important reactions came from the two people whose opinions actually mattered, Clara and Jonah. The kids came to stay with me Wednesday evening, and I could tell immediately that they'd heard something. 11-year-old Clara has always been perceptive beyond her years, and 9-year-old Jonah picks up on emotional undercurrents like a bloodhound picks up scents. "Dad," Clara said while we were making dinner together, "Mom said Isabella moved out." "That's right, sweetheart. Isabella and I are having some problems, and we decided it would be better if she stayed somewhere else for a while. Are you getting divorced?" Jonah asked, looking up from his homework at the kitchen table. I paused, realizing this was one of those parenting moments where honesty was more important than protecting them from uncomfortable truths. "I don't know yet, buddy. We need to figure some things out first." What surprised me was their reaction. I'd expected questions, maybe some sadness about the disruption to their routine, possibly some concern about how this would affect their living situation. Instead, Clara nodded like this made perfect sense, and Jonah just went back to his math homework. Later that evening, while we were watching a movie, Clara curled up next to me on the couch and said something that nearly broke my heart. Dad? You seem happier now. Out of the mouths of babes. My 11-year-old daughter had noticed something that apparently half the adults in my life had missed, that living with someone who doesn't respect you is like carrying a weight you don't even realize is there until it's gone. I am happier, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to make difficult choices to take care of themselves. Like when you told me I didn't have to be friends with Megan anymore after she was mean to me. Exactly like that. For the first time in months, maybe years, my kids saw their father as someone who wouldn't tolerate being treated poorly, someone who valued himself enough to walk away from a situation that was making him miserable. They saw strength instead of resignation, boundaries instead of endless accommodation. And that, more than anything else, told me I'd made the right choice. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the universe to start delivering some poetic justice with a side of humble pie. 3 weeks of Isabella discovering what life looked like when you actually had to pay for your own phone bill, your own car insurance, your own overpriced lattes and wellness coaching sessions. 3 weeks of reality crashing into privilege like a freight train hitting a BMW. I heard about Isabella's new circumstances through the neighborhood gossip network, which was more efficient than the CIA when it came to gathering intelligence. Janet Peterson had apparently made it her personal mission to track Isabella's post-lockout life, like some kind of suburban war correspondent. According to Janet's sources, and let's be honest, Janet had sources everywhere. Isabella had moved in with Gabriel temporarily, which was already causing tension because Gabriel's husband wasn't thrilled about having his sister-in-law's drama disrupting his peaceful home life. But the real entertainment came when Isabella tried to maintain her previous lifestyle without my financial support. Apparently, she'd gone to Target expecting to drop her usual $1,000 on whatever caught her fancy, only to discover that her credit cards weren't just frozen, they were canceled. The cashier had to cut up her Visa right there at the register while a line of soccer moms watched the show. Janet described it as quite the spectacle, which in Janet's world was basically the equivalent of calling it a Category 5 disaster. Isabella had also tried to go with the eucalyptus towels, only to be informed that her membership had been terminated and she'd need to pay the full initiation fee, plus monthly dues if she wanted to rejoin. Apparently, she'd made quite a scene about that too, demanding to speak to the manager and threatening to sue for discrimination. The manager, according to Janet's intelligence network, had politely explained that not paying your bills wasn't a protected class under civil rights law. The cell phone situation was particularly problematic because Isabella had apparently never bothered to learn my social security number or any of the account information needed to set up her own service. She'd been using Gabriel's phone for everything, which was causing its own set of issues since Gabriel's husband was getting tired of his wife's phone being tied up with Isabella's social life and job search drama. Yeah, job search. Turns out when you don't have someone else paying for your every need, you actually have to work for a living. Who could have predicted that shocking development? But the real wake-up call came when Isabella tried to find her own apartment. See, having your name on a deed doesn't mean much when you've never actually paid any of the associated expenses. Isabella had no credit history in her own name, no proof of income, no rental references, and no savings account because she'd spent every penny I'd ever given her on maintaining her lifestyle. Landlords, it turns out, want tenants who can actually pay rent, not tenants who can explain at length why their estranged husband should pay their rent. I learned all of this not because I was stalking Isabella's misfortunes, but because people kept calling to update me like I was following some kind of reality TV show. My buddy Tom was particularly good at gathering intelligence through Karen, who was still part of Isabella's social circle and therefore had front row seats to the ongoing disaster. She tried to get a job at that marketing firm downtown, Tom reported during one of our weekly phone calls. Apparently, the interview didn't go well when they asked about her work experience, and she had to explain that she'd been focusing on her marriage for the past 3 years. Focusing on her marriage. That was a creative way to describe spending my money while treating me like I was beneath her notice. Yeah, and when they asked for references, she put down your name. They called you yesterday, didn't you get the message? I had gotten the message, actually. A very professional woman from Henderson Marketing had called to verify Isabella's employment history and character references. I'd been polite but honest. Isabella had never worked during our marriage. I'd financially supported her graduate education, and while she was intelligent and capable, I couldn't speak to her work ethic or professional reliability since I'd never observed either in a work context. I'd wished the company luck with their decision and hung up. Isabella didn't get the job, but the most interesting development came on a Thursday evening when my phone rang and Richard Moreno's name appeared on the screen. Not Isabella calling from someone else's phone, not Gabrielle trying to mediate, Richard himself, calling me directly for the first time in 3 years. Marcus. His voice was different, less commanding, more tired. Richard, what can I do for you? There was a long pause, the kind of silence that happens when someone is swallowing their pride and finding it tastes worse than they expected. I wanted to talk to you about Isabella. Okay. She's struggling, Marcus. This whole situation has been very difficult for her. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for him by jumping in with reassurances or apologies. If Richard wanted to have this conversation, he was going to have to actually have it. She's living with Gabrielle, but that's not working out well. She can't find a job, can't get approved for an apartment, can't even get a decent cell phone plan because she has no credit history. That sounds challenging, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Marcus, I think I owe you an apology. Now that was unexpected. Richard Moreno apologizing to anyone was like finding a unicorn in your backyard. Theoretically possible, but not something you'd ever actually expect to witness. For what? For not understanding what you were dealing with. For treating you like you weren't good enough for our family when you were the one holding everything together. The silence stretched out between us, filled with 3 years of condescension, dismissal, and casual disrespect that we were both remembering. Isabella called me crying yesterday, he continued. She said she never realized how much you did for her until it was gone. She said she thought you'd always be there, that you'd always take care of everything, no matter how she treated you. And what did you tell her? I told her that respect should never be realized in hindsight, that it should be practiced daily, in the moment, when it matters. For the first time in our entire relationship, Richard Moreno wasn't arguing with me. He wasn't trying to prove I was wrong, wasn't defending Isabella's behavior, wasn't making excuses for his family's treatment of me. He was actually agreeing with me. She wants to talk to you, Marcus. She wants to try to work things out. I know. She's been calling. Are you going to talk to her? I looked around my house, my peaceful, drama-free house where I could eat dinner without being ignored, watch TV without being dismissed, and go to bed without wondering what I'd done wrong that day. Maybe, but not because she's struggling and not because she finally realizes what she lost. If I talk to Isabella, it'll be because she's learned something about respect that goes deeper than just missing her lifestyle. Richard was quiet for a long moment. That's fair, Marcus. That's more than fair. When we hung up, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't the problem that needed to be solved. I wasn't the one who needed to change, compromise, or try harder. I was finally the one whose boundaries were being respected. For months. That's how long it took Isabella to figure out that pride doesn't pay rent and entitlement doesn't cover car insurance. For months of living in the real world where your charm doesn't get you a discount at the grocery store and your magnetic personality doesn't convince landlords to waive security deposits. 4 months of discovering that when you've spent 3 years treating your husband like an ATM with legs, you might actually have to face some consequences for that choice. The call came on a rainy Tuesday in March. Not a dramatic storm or anything cinematic, just one of those steady drizzles that makes everything look gray and makes you want to stay inside with a good book and a cup of coffee. I was doing exactly that when my phone buzzed with Isabella's name. Her actual name this time, not Gabrielle's phone or Dad's phone, like the previous dozen times she'd tried to reach me. Marcus? It's Isabella. I know. Your name came up on my phone. A pause. In the old days, that would have been her cue to launch into some speech about how I was being cold or unreasonable. Instead, she just took a breath and kept going. I was wondering, could we meet somewhere? Just to talk. About what? About us. About what I did. About what I said. Her voice was different, smaller, less certain, like someone who'd been knocked down a few pegs and was still figuring out how to navigate from a lower altitude. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like a chance to explain. I looked out my window at the rain, at my peaceful neighborhood where I could now walk around without wondering if the neighbors were judging me for not being good enough for the woman who lived in my house. I thought about Clara and Jonah, who'd been sleeping better at my place, laughing more, acting like kids instead of walking on eggshells around an adult who might roll her eyes at them for existing too loudly. Okay, coffee shop on Maple Street, Saturday at 10 a.m. 1 hour. Thank you, Marcus. Really, thank you. Saturday morning came with one of those perfect spring days that makes you believe in new beginnings and second chances. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be settled and centered before whatever conversation we were about to have. I ordered my usual black coffee, found a corner table, and watched Isabella pull into the parking lot in a Honda Civic that had definitely seen better days. She walked in looking like a completely different person from the woman who'd left my house 4 months ago. Gone were the designer clothes and the perfect hair and the general air of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around her comfort. This Isabella looked tired, a little worn around the edges, like someone who'd been learning some hard lessons about how the world actually worked. "Hi," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for agreeing to meet. You said you wanted to explain. So explain." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. And for a moment, she looked younger, more vulnerable than I'd seen her since those early days when I thought we were building something real together. "I was cruel to you, Marcus. Not just the night I said I didn't respect you, but for months before that. Years, really." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Actual remorse. Not the performative kind designed to get her way, but the real thing that comes from understanding the weight of your own actions. "I took everything you did for granted. I treated your generosity like it was my right instead of your choice." "Yes, you did. I know you have no reason to believe me, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought love meant never having to worry about money or bills or any of the practical stuff because someone else would always take care of it. I thought respect was something you earned once and then just had forever. And now I know that respect is something you give every day in 1,000 small ways, or you lose it. I know that when someone takes care of you, it's not because they have to, it's because they choose to. And when you make someone feel like their choice doesn't matter, like they're just a provider instead of a partner, they stop choosing you." I sipped my coffee and studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, the little tells that would indicate this was just another performance designed to get her life back to the comfortable level she preferred. But what I saw was something different, a woman who'd been broken down by reality and was trying to figure out how to build herself back up into someone worth respecting. "Isabella, I appreciate you saying all of this. I really do. But apologies don't undo 3 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough for you, while simultaneously being expected to fund your lifestyle. I know they don't." She leaned forward, her eyes serious. "I'm not asking you to take me back, Marcus. I'm not even asking for another chance, not yet. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you, to us. I wanted you to know that you were right to draw that line, to refuse to accept being treated that way. That was unexpected. I'd been prepared for tears, for promises to change, for elaborate schemes to win me back. I hadn't been prepared for her to tell me I'd been right to kick her out. What are you asking for then? Time. Space to become someone who actually deserves your respect instead of just expecting it. I got a job, not a great one, but it's a start. I'm living in a studio apartment that's about the size of our old walk-in closet, and I'm learning to budget and pay bills and take care of myself like an actual adult." She smiled, and for the first time in years it looked genuine. "It's humbling as hell, but I think I needed to be humbled. And after you've learned all these life lessons, after I've learned them, really learned them, not just intellectually but in my bones, maybe we could try again. Not picking up where we left off, but starting over. Building something based on actual mutual respect instead of whatever it was we had before." I finished my coffee and looked at this woman who'd been my wife, who'd shared my bed and my house and my life, while making me feel like I wasn't worthy of basic human decency. She was different now, that much was clear. Whether she was different enough, whether the change was deep enough and permanent enough to matter, remained to be seen. "Isabella, I'm not the same man who bought you that engagement ring 3 years ago. I'm not the man who would subsidize his own disrespect because he was so desperate to be loved that he'd accept being tolerated instead. That man is gone. I know, and honestly, I'm glad he's gone. You deserve better than what I gave you." We sat in silence for a moment, Two people who'd shared a life trying to figure out if there was anything left worth salvaging. So what happens now, she asked. Now you continue learning how to be someone worth respecting. And I continue being someone who won't accept anything less than that. Maybe someday those two people will be compatible. Maybe they won't. But either way, I'm not compromising on the respect part ever again. She nodded like she understood, like she finally got it. That's fair. That's more than fair. As we left the coffee shop and walked to our separate cars, her Honda Civic, my BMW that I no longer had to share with someone who treated me like hired help, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. Not certainty. Not the desperate hope I'd clung to during our marriage, but genuine possibility. Maybe Isabella would continue growing into someone capable of the kind of respect that made love meaningful. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe we'd find our way back to each other on terms that actually worked for both of us. Maybe we wouldn't. But for the first time in my adult life, I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't settle for anything less than what I deserved. I'd rebuilt my life with my kids, with peace in my home, with the knowledge that boundaries weren't suggestions, they were requirements. Love without respect was just expensive loneliness. And I was done paying that price. Whether Isabella figured out how to offer something better remained to be seen. But I'd already won the only prize that really mattered, myself back, and that was more than enough to build a life on.